I had been at the desk since before the sun came up, and the ink on the side of my hand had dried the way it always dried, in a gray smear I stopped noticing years ago. There were 4 stacks in front of me: the budget for the coming year, the transfer plan for the Dragon's Jewel, 2 more I had finished in the night and not yet filed. I set my pen down, straightened the top sheet with 2 fingers, and reached for the next one. It was a good morning. Everything was where it should be, and I knew where every page in the room lived. That was the last quiet minute I got. The door opened hard enough to knock a pen off the shelf, and Commander Garrett filled the frame. He did not knock, and he did not sit. He told me, flatly, that I was finished, that the Black Funeral Nights had no place for a man who played at writing while real men bled, and that as of this morning, I was fired. I thought I had misheard him. I set my pen down flat on the desk. "Say that again," I said. He crossed the room instead of answering, took the top document off my stack, and tore it in half in front of me. A full day's work, the Beast Hunt roster I had copied twice to get the ledger clean. He tore the halves into quarters and let the pieces drift down onto the desk like a man salting a field. "Anyone could rip up paper," he said. It was not an achievement. The strange thing is what I felt watching it happen. Not fear yet. My eye had gone to the 2 stacks underneath, the ones that actually mattered. The coming year's budget for the whole order, and the transfer plan for the Dragon's Jewel. And the clerk in me was already calculating how many weeks it would take to rebuild them if his hand kept moving down the pile. That was where my mind went first. Not to my job, to the records. I had spent so long being the only person who knew where everything was that I had stopped being able to imagine the order without me holding it together. Behind him, the others crowded in through the door. They had clearly been waiting for it. One of them said I had picked myself the easy job while they patrolled in the cold. Another said the only reason I got out of the expeditions at all was my family name. A third just laughed and told the room I looked like something the inkpot had thrown up. And that was the part they all agreed on. The privileged clerk, unwashed, soft-handed, finally getting what was coming. I stood up. I want to be honest about that part, because it was the last thing I did that morning that felt like standing. I handle everything this order runs on, I told them. The rosters, the budgets, the supply lines, the requisitions that kept them fed and armed. All of it came through this desk, and none of them had ever once had to think about it. That was not nothing. I said the words carefully, the way I would read a figure back to confirm it. Then I told them the rest, because I still believed the truth was worth something. I told them my skill. It is called Clerk, and it does not just move paper, it grants. Every knight in this fortress who woke up one morning stronger than he went to sleep. Every man who found a new title on his record he could not explain. That was me. Quietly, through the registry, one entry at a time. I had been feeding this order its strength for years, and I had never asked to be thanked. The room went quiet for a breath. Then it broke into laughter, the whole pack of them, harder than before. A delusional clerk giving himself credit for their swords. Garrett let them laugh, and when it died down, he offered me what he called a chance. If I truly belonged among knights, I could prove it the way knights did, a duel. Against the strongest blade in the order, against Malcolm. I should have heard the trap close. I did not. I heard the word chance, and I took it, because I thought being useful had earned me one. Malcolm came to me before it started, golden-haired, easy, the best of us, and everyone knew it, and he put a hand on my shoulder, like the friend I had honestly believed he was. He kept his voice low, under the noise of the ring. He laid out a plan for me, quick and detailed. I would open with an upper slash. He would give ground. I would counter to the torso, and he would take the fall and let me look like a knight for one afternoon. A gift, a way out with my head up. I asked him, quietly, what he was planning. He only smiled and stepped back to his mark. So I did it, upper slash. He gave ground, exactly as promised. I turned my body for the counter to the torso, the way he had drawn it for me, and I committed to it completely, because I trusted the plan. There was no counter to make. He was already behind me. Whatever he called me as he struck, I only caught pieces of it. A fool for thinking he would ever cooperate with the likes of me. The blow took me off my feet and put me down in the dirt, and the ring of watching knights made a sound I had never heard aimed at me before. I lay there with the taste of the ground in my mouth, and one clear, useless thought going around and around, that I had followed his plan exactly. Upper slash, give ground, counter to the torso. I had done every step right. The plan had never been for me to win. It had been a set of instructions for how to turn my own body around, so my back was open. He stood over me while I tried to get my hands under myself, and told the whole ground to look at the pathetic thing that had somehow called itself a member of the strongest order. I did not get up. I want to say I chose not to, that there was some dignity in it, but the truth is plainer than that. There was nothing in me to get up with. Then he crouched, so I would be sure to hear the last of it clearly, and he told me the thing that actually broke me. My family had already cast me out. The O'Briens had disowned me. There was no house behind my name anymore, no protection, no home to be sent back to. I had been erased before I ever walked onto this ground, and every man here had known it but me. The cold came up off the earth beside my face. Malcolm had raised his hand, and I felt the air pull tight the way it does right before his ice lance takes shape, and I understood, dully, that he was not going to stop at humiliating me. Garrett's voice cut across the ground. He told Malcolm to hold. The word from Silas had been to expel me. Expel, he said, not kill. Understand? Silas. My father's name, said out loud by the man throwing me out. So it was true. Not a rumor Malcolm had sharpened to hurt me. My father had signed it himself. They took me by the arms and carried me out, and I let them. I did not fight the grip, did not dig in my heels, did not say a single word in my own defense on the way through the gate. There was nothing left to defend it to. The man who ran the records, the man who fed them their strength, the son of the house that built this order, all of that had been true an hour ago, and none of it had held. At the gate, with the wind coming up off the hill and the Capitol sitting small and gray below us, I laughed. Once. It came out of me dry and short, with nothing behind it, and even I did not know exactly what it was for. My father's name on the order, maybe. The neatness of it. A whole life of careful, useful, invisible work, torn in quarters and salted into a field. And the last true thing I had said all day was the one thing they had laughed hardest at. I kept turning that word over. Expel, not kill. My father had thought about me long enough to draw the line exactly there, far enough to be rid of me, not so far as to spend a body. That was the measure of what I had been worth to him. A line in an order, set by a man who had never once come to see the desk I worked at. I had spent my whole life certain that being needed was the same as being safe. I had the entire day, laid out end to end, to see how wrong that had been. They set me down outside the wall and left me there. The gate closed. That was the end of me, as far as anyone inside was concerned. Inside, once the ground had cleared and there was no one left to perform for, Malcolm stayed behind. He had won, and the win had cost him nothing, and he wanted the small pleasure of feeling his own power again in the quiet. He raised his hand the way he had 1,000 times, the way he had just threatened to, and he reached for the ice lance that had made him the strongest blade in the order. Nothing came. No cold pulled into the air. No shape formed over his palm. He stood there with his hand up and his fingers open, and the light going long across the empty ground, and there was only his own bare skin and the silence. He tried again. He turned his hand over and stared at it like it belonged to someone else. He shook it out and set his feet and reached deeper, the way a man reaches for a word he knows. And still, there was nothing there to take hold of. He said, half to himself, that it could not be, that surely he could still call the lance. The words came out thin. He was not asking anyone. There was no one to ask. He did not understand it. He had no way to understand it, because he had spent years never once thinking about the ink-stained man at the desk, or the registry, or where exactly his strength had been coming from all this time. He only knew that the moment they threw that man out the gate, something in his own hand had gone dark, and he could not say why. I was already halfway down the hill by then, with nothing to my name and no idea where I was walking. I did not know it either. I did not feel a thing change in me as I went. But the order that had just thrown me out its gate had thrown away far more than a clerk. And the man standing alone on that training ground with his empty hand raised was only the first of them to feel it go. They would be a long time finding out what they had done. I would be a long time finding out what I was. A hand the size of a dinner plate shook me by the shoulder, and for one warm second, I thought I had slept through morning drill. I came up already apologizing, the words half formed. My body braced for the commander who wasn't there. It wasn't a room, it was a bench, and the bench was moving, packed shoulder to shoulder with strangers who smelled of road dust and cold. A stagecoach, rattling down a track I had no memory of taking. So it was real then. The order, the duel, the gate at the top of the hill. Some small stupid part of me had gone to sleep, hoping the whole thing was a long, ugly dream I could log, file, and forget by breakfast. Instead, I woke up in my sleep clothes, on a road going somewhere I had never heard of, with the last of my life somewhere behind me. I laughed. Quiet, just the once. The big man beside me took that as an opening. He was round and loud and delighted about both, and it turned out he had told me his name the day before, back when I had been too far gone to hear a word of it. Marvin Coombs, he repeated, patient as a merchant, quoting the same price twice. Not Malcolm. He seemed to think it was a fine joke that I had mumbled that name in my sleep. I let him keep the joke. I didn't tell him the name still landed in me like a splinter I couldn't reach. I asked him which way we had come. He only shrugged and said I had climbed aboard, looking like a man who wanted to be far away and hadn't much cared in what direction. That, at least, I couldn't argue with. Keswick was the last town before the end of the world, and it looked it. The coach shuddered to a stop and spilled us out into a street hemmed by low walls, and there, past the roofs, stood the Great Wall, a thing so tall the eye refused it, gray and blank, and older than any story anyone still told. Marvin threw an arm toward it like he owned the view. Built by nobody remembered who, he said, for nobody remembered what, with a whole dead world on the far side, if you believed the drinking talk. I didn't move. A man shoved past me and told me I was in the way, and I said sorry to his back, and still I didn't move. Marvin fixed that. He came back chewing a strip of dried meat, pressed one into my hand, and informed me that a man could do nothing on an empty stomach. His own company had made it, he added, twice the keeping of the ordinary kind, all in the soak. Then he clapped me on the back, hard enough to rattle my teeth, told me we had both come out here chasing something new, so we had better work hard at it, and wandered off debating out loud whether to see the wall first or the Golden Tree Forest, where some old hero named Alfredo had died. I ate the meat. It was, against everything, genuinely good. The salt sank into me like it had somewhere it needed to be, and for a breath, I felt almost awake. Then Marvin was gone into the crowd, and I was a nobody in my nightclothes at the edge of the map. I looked back once, the way you look at a door that's already shut. My breath went out white and came apart in the cold. I would need work. That much a man knows even when he knows nothing else. I stepped into the crowd and let it take me. I made my own resume. It was the one thing that came easy. My skill put the letters down clean and even, the way it always had, and I never stopped to wonder why a pen felt lighter in my hand than in anyone else's. To me, it was just neat paperwork. The hiring manager had clearly never seen a resume in his life. He turned it over like it might be a summons, read my history, and accused me flat out of lying. When I told him he was welcome to check it, that I had served with the Black Funeral Knights until very recently, the man changed in front of me like weather. Suddenly, I was Sir. Suddenly, there was a chair and tea, and the company was expanding its roots. And would I do them the honor of captaining their caravan guard, or perhaps running security for the whole district? He laid the offers out like gifts. I only ever did the paperwork, I told him. I'm looking for clerk work. The tea stopped halfway to his mouth. A clerk, not a guard. He said the words back to me as if I had asked to sweep the floor for the privilege of it. He hemmed, he stalled, and then he remembered that a clerk had quit on him just that week. And grudgingly, as if handing over something he'd rather keep, he told me the seat was mine if I truly wanted it. I wanted it. My eyes stung. After more than 10 doors closing in my face, I was so grateful for one plain, honest desk that I nearly thanked him twice. I never got the chance. A staffer hurried in, snatched the paper off the counter, went white, and started whispering. I caught my old family name in it. I caught the word disowned, and I caught the manager's answer, without either of them meaning me to, that it would be bad, very bad, to be caught employing a cast-off of that house, and best they simply pretend none of this had happened. I understood. I said so, quietly, and I picked up my coat, and I left before they had to ask me to. The name had followed me all the way to the end of the world. Of course it had. Evening found me walking with no particular place to walk to. A stallkeeper called out, waved a skewer of grilled meat under my nose, and, when I hesitated, offered to knock the price down for a fellow who looked like he needed it. I checked my coins. I had them counted before I'd finished reaching, which told me everything. I told him I had no money, and I meant it, and he let me go easy. All around me, people were spilling toward the stalls, warm and loud and finished with their day, and I stood in the middle of them, like a man watching a party through glass. I had run out of trades that would take a knight's name, and out of luck for hiding it, which was how I ended up stopped in front of the one door I had been avoiding. A broad, lantern-lit doorway with a wooden sign and the sound of drinking behind it. The Adventurers Guild. The place took anyone. That was the whole point of it, and the whole shame of it. I switched the name at the top of my papers before I went in. Not the one that slammed doors, my mother's, Harrington. Then I pushed the door open. The staring started before the door had shut behind me. I went to the counter and told the red-haired girl behind it that I wanted to register, and I set my resume down like it was the natural thing to do. It was the wrong thing entirely. She blinked at it, kind and confused. Behind me, a table of adventurers got one look at a scrawny man in worn clothes presenting a formal document to a mercenary hall, and they came apart laughing. Some rich boy playing hero, one of them called it. The words rolled off me. After the day I'd had, mockery was almost restful. The girl, Trina, her badge said, slid the proper guild form across and started to say I wouldn't be needing the fancy paper. Then her senior arrived. Reggie was older, sharper, and already reaching for her coat, and her first move was to tell Trina to send the boy home, seeing as they were near closing. The drinkers howled that turning away a paying rookie was too cruel, until Reggie turned on them, and the whole rowdy table suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere. It was on her way out that her eye snagged the resume. Black funeral nights, in my own clean hand. She stopped like she'd hit a wall. She wanted to know if it was real. I started to explain that yes, I had been with the order, but only ever at a desk, that my skill wasn't the kind she was picturing. She wasn't listening. None of them were now. There was no exam for a former black funeral night, she announced to the room, and stamped my form so hard the counter jumped. When someone protested there was supposed to be a test, she said the country's strongest order was test enough, and I watched every laughing face at those tables curdle into something closer to fear. A few of them started working out how to apologize. I got a word in edgewise, or thought I did. I told them plainly I had done office work, that they were mistaken about me. My voice went nowhere. It sank under Reggie already doing sums out loud about what a name like mine would do for a guild that was quietly drowning in debt. So I did the only proud thing left to me. I asked for the smallest, safest job on the board. The beginner's errand, a walk in the woods to gather a common little plant called silverwort, the sort of quest they hand to children on their first day. I wanted small. I had learned, the hard way and twice over, exactly what glory costs a man. The room found that hilarious all over again. A legend, they jeered, off to pick weeds. Trina didn't laugh. She just took my crumpled form and filled it out beside me. And partway through, she stopped, looked at how fast my half of it had gone down, and said, half to herself, that she had never handed that sheet to anyone who finished it so quickly. I wasn't there for what came after. Trina told me about it later. The way you tell a story you're a little proud to have stood inside. The next afternoon, the guild was half asleep, she said, warm and slow, the busy hours still a long way off. Then the bell rang and a big slab of an adventurer came in, Orson, all shoulders and noise, and dropped a sack of monster proof on the counter, boasting his job had been nothing. Trina checked the parts against her list, unbothered, while he fidgeted like a boy with a question he was too proud to ask. He asked it anyway, that new one. The former black funeral night. What quest had a man like that gone and taken? Reggie was back from her lunch by then, and she answered it flat, almost sour. Silverwort gathering, the rookie's errand. Orson didn't believe it, so she said it again, and then the two of them tore into me together for the sport of it. A title with nothing under it, a disappointment of a night. Reggie had let herself dream, out loud, of the savior who'd haul the guild out of the red, and instead, she'd signed up a man who picked weeds for coppers. Orson laughed till the counter shook, and Trina, Jr., outranked, one small voice in an empty hall, put down her checklist and told them both to stop. Everyone starts at the bottom, she said. He was new. A beginner's quest was exactly what a beginner should take, and there was nothing shameful in it. Then she went further. The way you only go when you actually believe a thing. She told them she had a feeling that the quiet man they were laughing at was going to walk back through that door with something none of them saw coming, something incredible, and she said it looking each of them dead in the eye, daring them to remember it. The hall went quiet for exactly one breath. Then Orson broke it, wheezing, and swore that if the weed picker ever came back from a rookie herb run with anything worth a second glance, he would strip to his small clothes and run a full lap around the guild in front of everyone. He said it like a man who knew he'd never have to pay. Reggie snorted. The afternoon light went on drifting through the dust, and Trina stood there in the middle of their laughter, chin up, not backing down an inch. The one person in the whole town who had looked at me and bet, out loud and for nothing, that they were all wrong. Out in the Golden Tree Forest, hours away, and knowing none of it, I was already taking out my pen. The forest was supposed to be impossible. That was the word everyone in Keswick used for it. A whole search party had gone into the Golden Tree Forest a season back and come out empty, cursing the silverwort like it owed them money. The legendary hero Alfredo had died somewhere under these trees, and people said his name in a hush, the way you say the name of a place that eats people. I stepped over a root, sneezed hard enough to startle a bird, and rubbed my arms. Cold. I wanted to be done before the early dark came down. I took out the guild's little sample drawing and held it up against the whole green sprawl of the forest floor. Silverwort. It looked exactly like grass. It looked exactly like every other weed for a mile in each direction. Standing there squinting, I understood why the search party had quit. Finding one specific blade of green in a forest of green by eye was not a task, it was a joke. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I sat down on a root and I took out my pen. Back at the order, when the supply lines got tangled, I used to log them, where the water ran, where the carts could pass, where each crate was meant to sit. It was the one thing my hands were ever sure of. So I did it here too. I set the nib to paper and let auto-writing work, and in the space of a breath, the whole forest drew itself across the page. Every ridge, every stream, every hollow, exact. I never thought about why it worked. Other people's pens made letters. Mine made the world, precise, the moment I asked it to. And I'd stopped finding that strange years ago, the way you stop hearing a clock in your own house. It sat lighter in my hand than a pen had any right to. I didn't wonder about it, I just used it. There was a lake on the map I didn't remember passing. I looked at it for a second, decided it had nothing to do with me, and moved on. I zoomed the drawing down to the patch of ground I was sitting in and let the pen write out everything that grew there, a plain list of names running down the margin. Halfway down, there it was, silverwort. I told the pen to mark it. The nib switched to red on its own, and little red dots bloomed across my sketch, dozens of them, scattered through the grass I'd just been staring at blind. Then I looked up. The dots were on the actual ground, faintly glowing, sitting over the real soil, exactly where the drawing said they'd be. I got up and started picking. It went fast. I hummed a little, moving dot to dot, and the basket filled while the light was still good. Somewhere around half full, I stopped and honestly wondered about it. This was a beginner quest. The board had it marked for novices, the lowest tier there was, the sort of job you handed a person on their first day. And without the pen, I'd never have found a single stem of it. I could not work out how a real beginner was supposed to do this at all. Being an adventurer, I decided, was a harder profession than anyone gave it credit for. I filled the basket to the top and was walking home before dark. Easy. The guild hall went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when you walk in, and you are the joke. I heard the word before I reached the counter, the disappointing night, back again. The adventurers along the wall didn't trouble to lower their voices. One of them said something about the great fallen knight out picking weeds with the children, and the rest laughed on cue. I'd stopped minding it a while ago. There was nothing they could call me that the day I got thrown out of the order hadn't already called me first. I set the basket on the counter. "This, please," I said. Trina lit up like I'd handed her a prize. She leaned over the rim, red hair falling forward, and told me it was a wonderful haul. So many, well done. And I could hear that half of it was aimed past me, straight at the laughing wall. Reggie moved in before Trina could stamp the form. The senior receptionist put a cold, careful smile on and explained, for the room's benefit, that silverwort gathering was novice work, that a man of my supposed pedigree taking scraps off the beginner board only bled the guild's coin, and that surely I understood and would kindly withdraw the request. Trina didn't let her finish. She slapped the stamp down, pressed a small handful of coins into my palm, and more or less steered me toward the door, chirping that the transaction was done. All done. I could go now. So I went. The door came open before my hand ever touched it. A man half fell through it, travel-stained, out of breath, a merchant by the cut of his coat and the panic on his face. He had been running. He caught himself on the frame, swept the room with his eyes, and asked the counter in a rush whether it was true, whether this guild had silverwort. Trina, still holding my little stack of copper, said we did, and pointed at my basket where it sat on the counter under the fresh stamp. I watched the whole man change. He crossed the floor like it was tilting toward the basket, and when he got his hands to the rim, he made a sound I can only call relief. He lifted a single stem, turned it in the lamplight, pressed it between two fingers to be sure it was real. Then he told us the thing none of us knew yet. Silverwort had stopped growing. Not here, everywhere. The whole world over, the hardiest weed anyone had ever cursed had failed all at once. And the herb that went into the base of nearly every medicine there was had gone, in a single season, from worthless to unfindable. He'd been chasing rumors town to town for weeks. This basket, my basket, the joke basket, the children's weeds, was the first true silverwort he had laid eyes on, in longer than he wanted to say out loud. He named his price before anyone asked. 100,000 marks, he said, for the basket, right now. The hall stopped breathing. I want to be fair to the room here because the faces were the best part of the whole day. The adventurers who had been laughing a minute before stood with their mouths coming slowly open. Reggie's cold smile froze and then slid straight off her face. Trina had both hands pressed over her own mouth, and there I stood in the middle of it, holding a fistful of copper the size of a bad tip. being told the weeds in that basket were worth a small house. I said the only thing that came to me. That much? For grass? He was already counting it out onto the counter. I had walked in that morning hoping for coin enough to eat for a week and sleep somewhere with a roof over it. I walked out rich. I kept waiting to feel as though I had earned it, and I never quite got there because all I had done was pick up what the pen showed me. But the weight in my bag was real and heavy, and for the first time since the end of my old world, my hands were not empty. Trina told me the rest later because I had already gone. The moment the merchant's back was through the door, the hall came apart with noise. Staff crowded the counter. Somebody said out loud what the whole room had landed on at once. That little Trina, the junior, the one who'd been overruled, had been the only person to take the basket in, and thank the stars she had. Reggie, who had tried to send it away 30 seconds before it turned into a fortune, stood there in the wreck of her own good judgment. She recovered the way people like her recover, fast, and pointed at the money. There was more silverwort in the storeroom, she reminded everyone. The guild's own stock. Sell that at the new price, and today's near miss became a windfall. That was when a young staffer, cheerful and entirely unbothered, mentioned that he had sold the whole storeroom off days ago, ordinary price, to some merchant passing through. He couldn't see what all the fuss was about. Trina said Reggie made a noise she had never heard a grown person make. And then, because she was Reggie, she stopped shouting and started thinking. And inside a minute, she had a plan. If one washed-up clerk could stroll into the Golden Tree Forest and come out with a full basket, the herb was clearly still there for the taking. The guild would call a campaign. Every adventurer in Keswick into the forest, silverwort by the armful, at 100 times the going rate. Trina said she opened her mouth to say something and thought better of it. She was the only soul in that room who had started to wonder how exactly a man everyone called useless had found a vanished season's worth of a dead herb in a single afternoon. I went back the next morning. It was not complicated. The weeds sold for 100,000 marks a basket, and I knew where every stem in the forest was hiding. I would have been a fool not to. I took the pen out at the tree line, let it mark the ground red again, and started walking the dots with an empty basket, thinking about nothing grander than a warm bed and maybe 2 proper meals a day for the rest of the year. I heard the crowd before I saw it. There were, I stopped counting, dozens of them, adventurers and guild staff both, spread across the near slope and thrashing through the undergrowth like they'd each lost a ring in it. Reggie stood on a stump at the center of it in outdoor gear, shouting through a megaphone carved out of some animal's bone, a flag planted beside her with a silverwort painted on it the size of a door. As I came up the path, I caught her voice climbing. 100 times the price. No, 1,000 times for anyone who filled a basket. Nobody had filled anything. That much was plain from the faces. They had been at it for hours, and hours of finding exactly none of a herb you cannot see does something to a crowd's mood. I arrived, as it turned out, right in the middle of an argument. A big man was holding forth to anyone who would listen. Orson, though I didn't know the name yet, broad as a door and twice as loud. He had decided the whole thing was a fraud. The disappointing knight, he was telling them, obviously never found real silverwort at all. He'd grabbed an armful of some lookalike weed and passed it off, and now the guild had them all out here chasing a lie. Heads were starting to nod. Reggie, up on her stump, took the notion and ran at it. Perhaps the clever move was to gather the lookalike grass too, and sort it out afterward. You can't do that! Trina's voice cut clean across the clearing. She was out here as well, in field gear, red hair coming loose, planted square in front of the whole crowd. We do not know that he cheated, she told them, loud enough to carry to the trees. Maybe he simply found it. Reggie started to answer her with the odds. 1 man, 1 afternoon, against 100 people and a whole lot of nothing. And that was about when everyone noticed me, standing at the edge of the clearing, holding a basket already half full of glowing red-marked silverwort. It went very quiet for the second time in 2 days. Trina spun, saw me, and half shouted across the gap. Was that silverwort? Was that really it? Yes, I said. I looked down at the basket, then back up at the several dozen people staring at me. I didn't know about any of this. I'm honestly surprised the stuff sells for so much. That last part was a mistake. I could feel it land wrong in the air. Half of them looked at me, the way you'd look at a man walking on water. One fellow, alone, holding what 100 of them could not turn up in a day. The guild staff started murmuring about the black funeral nights, about what a man out of an order like that could likely do without breaking a sweat. But the other half of the crowd, Orson's half, looked at me like I'd lifted something out of their pockets, their faces shut. I had made their whole miserable day look like nothing just by strolling up the path. and nobody forgives you for that. I did not stay to untangle it. I gave the clearing a small bow out of old habit and started back down toward Keswick with my basket. I did not see the last part of it, Trina told me. Orson went straight to Reggie, loud, wanting her to agree that grass picking was not real adventuring, that a man like me had not earned a single mark of it. And Reggie, watching me walk off easy while Trina hurried to fall in beside me, did not argue with him. She only watched and said low and even that something would have to be done about that. I walked home counting marks in my head, warm for once in a long while, with no idea at all that I had just made my first enemy standing behind me in the trees. I had more money in my pocket than I'd ever held in my life, and I was spending the afternoon trying to hand it to a man who sold grilled meat on sticks. One basket of silverwort had turned into a fortune I didn't know what to do with, so I did the sensible thing and bought a skewer. While I waited for it, a little girl came flying out of an alley and ran straight into my leg. She went down. I went down faster, apologizing before she'd even finished blinking, insisting it was my fault. I hadn't been watching. Was she hurt? Could she stand? Her brother caught up out of breath. Her parents came running with their hands already raised to bow. They apologized. I apologized more. The girl looked up at me, decided I was safe, and thanked me by calling me old man. Her mother went scarlet and corrected her. Big brother, she told her. Say big brother. The family drifted off into the crowd, still waving. I waved back until they turned the corner. Then I stood there with a skewer going cold in my hand and looked, without meaning to, in the direction of the place I used to call home. It was very far away. It was, as far as anyone there was concerned, empty of me. I ate the skewer. It didn't help much. I wasn't there for the next part. I only learned its shape much later, the way you learn a wound by its scar. But it happened the same afternoon, so I'll tell it. Back in the city that had raised me, my younger brother Marcus won a training match against one of the family knights, and the whole courtyard fell over itself praising him, his swordsmanship, his genius, his resemblance to our father in his prime. Not one of them said my name. Marcus heard the silence where I should have been and hated it, though he kept smiling for the crowd. Then our father came across the stones, and everyone bowed. Silas didn't waste words. He named Marcus the heir. He told him to devote himself to it. And when Marcus asked, "What about my brother? What about Adrian?" our father answered without turning his head. There was no one named Adrian in this family. Marcus was the eldest son now. Understood. He left. He never looked back. My little sister Esmeralda had come running to play, and she stood there instead with the words settling on her like snow. Then she broke. "It's a lie," she sobbed into Marcus's chest. "Take it back. Take it back." Marcus went down on his knees on the flagstones and held her and had nothing to give her. Somewhere far to the north, I was throwing away a skewer. I didn't feel a thing. That was the cruel part. They mourned me all afternoon, and I never knew. I got back to the inn, homesick and stupid with it, and decided the cure was to write a letter home I would never send. That was how the whole thing started, a letter. I dug out my pen. My skill has a plain name, Clerk, and one honest trick under it, auto-writing, the thing that had just made me rich. On a whim, I told it to write out my own abilities, the way I'd log a supply route, just to see if all this adventuring had changed anything in me. The pen moved on its own and laid it all out in tidy lines. And no, nothing had grown. Same middling self I'd walked in with. I nearly laughed. Then I saw it. A new line under the clerk skill, sitting there where nothing had been before. One word I'd never seen the pen write about me, naming. My heart did something it hadn't done in a while. I didn't stop to wonder why the pen worked or why a new power had simply appeared in me overnight. I never wondered about that. It wasn't my business. I just wanted to try it. I went rooting through my luggage for anything to test it on and came up holding two smooth, egg-shaped things I had absolutely no memory of packing. Good enough. I wrote a name on a scrap of paper and set it in front of the first, Nell. I wrote a second and set it down, Pippa. Two names off the top of my tired head. For a moment, nothing happened at all. Then the papers caught fire. Not real fire, a smokeless flame that didn't spread and didn't burn the bed under it. The two scraps went up in a soft white blaze. The light swelled until I threw an arm over my eyes, and when it cleared, there were two little girls standing in my room where the eggs had been. One had black hair and cat ears. One had white hair and dog ears. Both of them looked at me like I was the sun coming up. "Father," they said, together, and hit me at a dead run. I went off the back of the bed and cracked my skull on the floorboards, and the world went dark on the single most confusing day of my life. When I came to, they were still there. That was the thing that undid me a little. I'd half hoped I'd dreamed it, and there they were, arguing in whispers about whether to wake me by pouncing. I checked the pen. The naming line was still there. So were they. I'll be honest about the next thought, because it's ugly and it matters. For about 3 seconds, I wondered how to undo them. Send them back to whatever they'd been. Return them to normal, safe, unfathered. Then Pippa leaned in, careful as anything, and asked in a small voice whether I disliked her being close. And I couldn't do it. Undoing them would have made me exactly the man who'd said there was no one named Adrian. So I didn't. The trouble came the next morning because 2 strange children had walked out of a single man's room, and the innkeeper, Mabel, drew the obvious ugly conclusion and called the guards. They had me pinned to the floor before I'd finished saying good morning. Mabel accused me flatly of taking the girls. I sputtered every true thing I had, and every one of them sounded like a lie. Then she offered me a way out, cold and clever. Maybe, she said, these 2 just latched onto a soft-hearted stranger on their own. Maybe I could say that. Maybe none of it was on me, and I felt the coward in me reach for it. Before I could, Nell and Pippa threw themselves between me and the guards and started shouting that it was all their fault. They'd forced themselves on me. I hadn't done anything. 2 tiny things trying to take the blame to get me loose. Something in my chest just gave way. Those 2 are my daughters, I said, loud enough that the whole inn heard it. They're mine. Please don't take them. They stopped fighting the guards. They turned and looked at me with their faces coming apart, and then they were across the room and in my arms, both of them crying father into my shirt. Mabel shrugged and told the guards it was all a misunderstanding, and they filed out grumbling. I had about 1 heartbeat of pure warmth before she added, without a flicker, that I'd be paying lodging for 2 more heads starting today. I have never yelled louder about money in my life. What followed was the fastest my fortune ever vanished. I took them to the best shop in town for the basics, and they came out from behind the curtain again and again, posing, demanding I say they were cute. I couldn't get the words out. They were so cute it physically hurt. I stood there shaking like a man facing down a monster, and the clerk scolded me for it until she worked out what was wrong, then smiled a shopkeeper's smile and suggested I buy a great deal. I bought a great deal. We settled into something I hadn't had in years. Meals. Head pats that made 2 tails wag. Nell, loud and competitive. Pippa, gentle and secretly strange. I caught her hoarding my socks and had a whole conversation about that I never expected to have as a parent. And then, one morning, the money ran out. All of it. A worldwide fortune, gone into clothes and rent, and 2 bottomless appetites, faster than I'd have believed. So I gathered my daughters, paused for dramatic effect the way you do, and told them the bad news. We were broke. There was only one thing a disgraced ex-knight with a magic pen could do about that. Back to the guild, back to work. Trina had a monster hunting job waiting for me, and she was halfway through explaining it when 2 small hands clapped over my eyes, and a voice crowed, "Guess who?" I'd told them to wait at the inn. I scolded them for exactly as long as it took to pat their heads, which is to say, not long. The guild started whispering the moment they saw me with 2 beautiful girls, and Nell, who lives to make things worse, leaned on me and purred something about last night that turned every head in the room. Pippa, meanwhile, nearly announced to a room full of strangers that I had given birth to them. I got a hand over her mouth just in time and swore very loudly that they were my daughters. Trina believed me, mostly. She offered the guild's childcare service so I could work, and Reggie, the senior receptionist who'd hated me since the silverwort made her look like a fool, snatched the papers away. That service was for women, she said, not for me. When Trina pointed at my record, Reggie called it luck. Then she smiled, and I should have known that smile meant a trap. If the girls didn't need minding, she said, then the girls should simply take the adventurer's exam and become adventurers themselves. There were 2 exams, Trina explained, a safe written one and a combat one against a real adventurer. My daughters, who had decided that the fastest way to help me was the only thing on their minds, heard the word fast and bolted straight for the combat ground. The examiner was Orson. Of course it was Orson, the big loud one who already hated me, standing there with a blunted training sword and a grin that had nothing kind in it. Reggie had built the whole thing to break me, not the children. If an outsider stepped in to help, that outsider lost his license forever. She wanted me to reach for them. She wanted to watch me fall doing it. Nell charged first, shouting the name of an attack like it was a spell, and Orson swatted her out of the air like a fly and laughed that this wasn't a fairy tale. Then he caught Pippa by the front of her clothes and hauled her off her feet, shaking her, and a crowd had gathered thick enough that no one could stop the exam. Trina was screaming at me to make them surrender. I heard her from very far away because I wasn't reaching for a sword. I had my pen out, and I was reading my daughter's profile the way I'd read a supply ledger, and I was writing in the margin. Fire magic wouldn't take. Some compatibility thing. The record simply refused it. Fine. I tried something else. I wrote Magic Sword, level 5, onto Nell's sheet, and the ink drained out of the bottle all at once like the paper had drunk it. Nell's eyes snapped open. She saw Pippa dangling in that brute's fist, and she came up off the ground with a scream. And this time, when she shouted the name, the whole blade caught in a blaze of real heat. Her little training sword sheared clean through Orson's, and he dropped Pippa and stumbled back, staring at his own snapped weapon. Nell caught her sister out of the air. "It's Father," she told her, breathless, fierce. "Father helped us." Pippa looked up at me. "Can I do it too?" she whispered. "You can," Nell said. And they both turned to face me at once with a trust so total it stopped my breath. "Because Father will help us. Like a fact of the world. Like the sun." I was already writing. Pippa was better at magic. I could feel the record want it, so I gave her the sky. She grabbed a stick like a wand, pointed it up, and a thundercloud folded out of a clear noon and dropped a fist of lightning right where Orson was scrambling to his feet. The crowd went silent. Somewhere behind me, I heard Reggie stop laughing. They passed. They didn't even remember it was an exam. They just wanted praise, and I gave it, both of them nuzzling into my stomach, while the whole hall watched a pair of children who'd swatted down a grown examiner. Reggie tried one last time. She lunged for the paper I'd written on and held it up like a hanged man's confession. "Proof," she shouted, "that I'd cheated." But Trina had already swapped it. What Reggie waved over her head was a marked up copy of the guild's own regulations. And the guildmaster, a calm old man named Fred, looked it over and dryly suggested I must have been studying the rules very hard for my daughter's sake. Reggie folded up on the spot. Fred declared the girls passed, apologized to me, and this time nobody interrupted when I picked both of them up at once. After that, my daughters were stronger than me, and everyone knew it. They came home from jobs bragging about ogres. They got fussed over at the guild like little idols. And somewhere in all of it, they got the idea they wanted a little sister. First, they asked me for a baby, in front of the entire guild, which took a decade off my life to explain. And then a tavern rumor gave them a better plan. There was a legend, a moving lake in this very forest, and sunk in it, the holy sword of some old hero. A blade with a name I won't spoil, though the hero's name was Alfredo. Find the sword, the girls decided. Bring it to Father, and have him name it into a little sister. Simple. So while I gathered Silverwort to fix the guild's books, and, if I'm honest, to fix Trina's mysteriously foul mood at me, the two of them ran off chasing a lake that only shows itself to the chosen. They came back at a dead sprint, screaming, delighted, dragging a rusted broken thing between them, and behind them, jaws open, a yellow dragon the size of a house. I met it with the new blade I'd bought and didn't overthink it. It had chased my children. It did not survive the meeting. When it was down, I cut off a fin for proof and realized, tiredly, that it matched a quest Trina had tried to hand me weeks ago. Then the girls shoved the rusted broken thing in my face. Half a sword, eaten through with rust, snapped clean in two. This, they announced with shining eyes, was the legendary Holy Blade, and would I please name it into their little sister. I told them it was a broken piece of junk. They looked at me like I'd kicked a puppy. I told them if they cleaned it up first, then maybe. I was certain they'd lose interest by morning. They did not lose interest. They polished that ruin until it gleamed, and I lost the bet fair and square. And one morning, I found myself kneeling in surrender on the floor with a scrubbed broken sword between us. They wanted the name to be the sword's own, the hero's blade, the legend, the whole impossible thing. I laughed at them and said it anyway, because I'd promised. I wrote the name on paper with the pen and turned it to show them. The paper caught fire. I told them not to worry. This happened when they were born too. And then Pippa pointed behind me, and my luggage was burning. My old knight's papers, the documents I'd written additions onto years ago and never touched since. The ones I knew, without knowing how, must not burn. It spread. Not like real fire. It ate only paper and pens and ink and left everything else alone. But it spread past the room, out the window, and when I looked out, there were small blazes breaking out all across the town, every one of them refusing to spread the honest way. I had no idea why. I still didn't ask why my pen did what it did. Some part of me was afraid of the answer. Then the light came, a hard, clear light from the center of the room, and the girls grabbed me, and I grabbed them. And when it faded, a nameplate dropped ringing to the floor, and a golden-haired girl stood in the last of the smoke. She looked at me and bowed her head. "The Holy Sword has arrived in answer to your call," she said. "Master, give me your command." The girls stared. I stared. She crossed the room and took hold of my sleeve, this new impossible daughter, and I understood in that moment that I had not summoned a weapon. I'd made another child. Her grip was fierce and a little desperate, and when I asked her name, she gave it plainly, X, short for the whole legendary mouthful. And the only thing in all the world she seemed afraid of was that I might not keep her, that I might send her back, return her to normal. I looked at the three of them, 2 daughters written out of loneliness, 1 blade written out of a broken promise. The exact family the one that made me had thrown in the fire, and I already knew I would never send a single one of them away. I just didn't know yet how badly I'd need them. I wasn't there for it. I want that on the record, because everything that happened in that forest happened while I was 200 miles away filing paper, and I only learned its shape much later. Malcolm stood in a clearing in Thornwood Forest and opened his mouth to call down ice lance. He had cast it 1,000 times. It was the spell that made him Malcolm, the one that turned a pack of goblins into red mist and let him laugh while it happened. That morning, the senior knights who used to dump their paperwork on a low-born boy named Seamus were being chased in circles by those very goblins, screaming his name, and Malcolm took his time about it. He wanted them to see who saved them. He said the words. Nothing came. For one heartbeat, the whole world shrank to the inside of his own chest. He said the words again, louder, and felt only the flat silence where the power used to live, like reaching for a stair in the dark and finding the floor gone. Once before, it had failed him this way, alone on an empty training ground the day they threw the clerk out the gate, and he had made himself call it a fluke and put it out of his mind. It did not let him call it a fluke twice. That power had answered every knight in the order. It was the thing that made them the strongest blades in the kingdom. And now, with a goblin already leaving the ground and coming for his throat, it simply was not there. He had no word for what he felt in that moment. I do. I have felt it. It is the feeling of the floor being pulled out from under a life you were sure you had earned. Seamus shouted a warning. Malcolm turned a half-second too slow. The knights who had spent months calling low-born men lowly dogs were beaten back through the underbrush by creatures they would have stepped on a season ago. They crawled home to the keep torn up and babbling the same impossible thing, that their strength had just gone, vanished, mid-swing, as if someone had reached quietly into every one of them and switched it off. Not one man in that forest thought of me. Why would they? That is the part I still turn over at night. Back at the keep, Commander Garrett was having the best day of his year. He had spent the morning gloating over a pile of ash. The strange fire that kept eating, riding across the whole region had reached the order too, and it had taken the budget ledgers with it. And those ledgers were the only thing tying Garrett to years of quiet embezzlement. He practically sang about it. He was already sketching fresh, false numbers, already deciding which brothel would get the skimmed marks. As far as Garrett was concerned, that fire was the best thing that had ever happened to a man. Then a knight came through the door white as chalk and told him Malcolm's whole group had been routed by goblins. Garrett did not care about the men. He cared about the story getting loose. He was still barking about how to bury it when a colder voice cut him off from the doorway. Duke Silas O'Brien, who owned the order the way a man owns a horse he has already decided to sell. The Duke told him the tale was in the streets already, that his only remaining job was to make the order look like the order again, and that he had better not fail. Then he turned to go, and on his way out he muttered, almost to himself, that this one was finished, and that the order behind him was finished too. That was my father. I will get to that. He stood in the wreckage of the men who had thrown his own son out of their ranks, and he never once wondered why their magic had died, because to wonder that, he would have had to think about me, and he had already decided I did not exist. And when Garrett, desperate, floated the idea of dragging me back, not as a knight, the expulsion had said knight. It had said nothing about a clerk. Malcolm, bandaged and barely upright, refused it with everything he had left. Bringing that man back, he said, would only shame them further. They argued in a tightening circle, and none of them, not one, landed on the truth sitting in plain sight in the middle of the room. The strength had walked out the door on my back. Every day I was gone, it took a little more with it. Then a young knight burst in, waving a torn wall newspaper, and all the shouting stopped at once. 200 miles north, I was having a very good afternoon. Nell and Pippa were playing hero in the corner of the hall, the same game as always. Nell the master, Pippa the sword. Some doomed pretend dragon struck down in one flash of light. Pippa took a stick to the shoulder and howled. Ow, Nell, you forgot to stop it again. Then next time you get to be the dad, Nell shot back, already snatching the stick up for another round. I leaned over the counter at them. Both of you, a little quieter. They dropped the sticks and ran off giggling, and Trina watched them go with the soft look people get around other people's children. Then I handed her the stack. She had given me a mountain of ruined guild records to redo, documents that same strange fire had eaten, the fire that had been chewing through paper all over Keswick for weeks. I had finished the whole pile. She flipped through it, and her face did something complicated because every page was perfect. Then it stopped being complicated and started being afraid because she remembered she had never shown me the originals. Nobody had. There was nothing left to copy from. I was reproducing, line for line, documents I had never once laid eyes on. The senior clerk beside her said it out loud. All the guild's paper had burned in that fire, so how could I possibly have? And I felt my face twitch. I still didn't like it when the fire came up. I knew more about that fire than I ever said, and I had stopped asking myself why my pen did the things it did somewhere back in the spring. That was around the time a quiet part of me started being afraid of the answer. So I did the thing I always did when the questions crept too close. I changed the subject loudly and asked for more work. They gave me more, half as a joke. The senior clerk mentioned, the way you mention weather, that an emperor dragon had been sighted near the town, a top-tier thing, the kind nobody fights and walks away from, and said maybe I would like to handle that as well. He fully expected me to laugh. I could probably manage it, I said. I was not going to fight the thing. You do not fight an emperor dragon, you relocate its interest. I asked for the best paper in the building, and the clerk, numb by now, brought me a rare sheet of wyvern skin. I wrote out Hollow Valley on it, a lonely stretch of nothing a few days from the capital. No people, no one to disturb. I laid down every detail of the place until it was more real on the page than it had ever been in life. Then I added one small line at the bottom, a little extra title, the way you would stamp a label onto a crate, the home of the Emperor Dragon. That was all it took. Somewhere out past the walls, a creature that could level a city turned in the air and began drifting toward a valley it had suddenly, absolutely, always belonged to. Trina asked what I was doing. I showed her. She decided I was overworked and joking, which was easier for everyone in the room. Then a merchant came to the counter wanting wheat prices. He had heard the guild got rich off silverwort and figured we knew things worth knowing. Trina started to stammer. I pulled a fresh sheet over and wrote him his prices, not just Keswick, but the capital, the coast, the far towns, the whole country laid out in neat columns. He snatched it up and nearly wept over it. It was no market note, he kept saying. It was a national price chart. Then he went very quiet and put one finger on a single line, a town called Redmark, prices climbing through the roof for no reason anyone had reported, and bolted out the door to go get rich, promising over his shoulder that he would be back. Trina watched him go and said, faint, that maybe they ought to just hire me. From the back of the hall, a heavy voice said he had been thinking the very same thing. The guildmaster's name was Fred, and he had just come back to find his burned records whole again. He looked at the stack, he looked at me, and he offered me the job on the spot. A clerk, salaried, a desk of my own. Yes, I said, before he had finished the sentence. Then again, in case he hadn't heard. Yes, I'll do it. I want to be honest about how badly I wanted it. I had been a knight once, and being a knight had nearly hollowed me out from the inside. A desk, a ledger, a quiet room. Work that stayed done when you finished it, that was the only thing I had ever truly wanted for myself. I would have signed my name in blood. Then a man ran in screaming that he had been robbed, and there was not a single adventurer in the hall, only X. X is the third of my girls, and I will only say this once. When X decides that someone has done wrong, the wrong is corrected in full, and the surrounding architecture rarely survives the correction. She went out. There was a sound like the sky clearing its throat. Half the guild hall came down in a slow, patient sheet of dust, and X walked back through it, dragging the thief by his collar, perfectly calm, fully prepared to hand out a sentence of 10,000 deaths for the theft of a handful of coins. I threw myself between them before that could happen. It took some arguing. Fred was very polite about the hole in his building, and then I made my one mistake of the evening. Trying to smooth it over, I mentioned, lightly, stupidly, that I knew the skill papers had gone up in that same strange fire, the one burning writing all across the town. I watched him hear it. I watched him do the arithmetic in his head, that I would know a thing like that I kept turning up wherever the impossible happened. And I watched him quietly decide he wanted no part of me. The job, he said, mild as milk. What job could I mean? He couldn't recall offering anyone a job, and that was that. I walked out into the evening with X at my side. carrying a bitterness I was getting far too used to, having lost the one thing I actually wanted between one sentence and the next. The trouble was, X did not stop. She heard everything. A scream 3 streets over, a threat down an alley, a hand sliding toward a stranger's purse, and she answered all of it, at full strength, usually through a wall. In the space of a few days, she flattened a market stall stopping a pickpocket, put a large rude adventurer named Orson face down on the cobbles for insulting me, and, the one that mattered, tore apart a kidnapping in a back alley and carried the Lord's daughter home without a scratch on the girl. The ringleader crawled off into the dark, clutching a ruined hand. Everyone else, she handed to the guards. What I had not understood, until about then, was how frightened she was underneath all of it. X had come into the world through my pen, the same as Nell and Pippa had, and some cold little part of her was certain that the day she stopped being useful would be the day I unmade her. She never once said it plainly. She just flinched at the wrong words and swung twice as hard, as though enough justice might buy her the right to stay. When I finally worked it out, I told her the only thing that mattered, that she was mine, that she was staying, that there was no version of any of this where I sent her back. She looked at me the way you would look at someone who had handed you the sun. Then, she leveled the town clock tower, capturing a purse snatcher, beamed at me through the smoke with the criminal held up like a bouquet, and called out to me. "Master!" I screamed loud enough to scatter every pigeon in the plaza. Nell laughed until she sat down. Pippa panicked. It was more or less an ordinary afternoon for us. The town, meanwhile, had started writing us down. There was a wall newspaper in the plaza, up on a board where the whole town could read it, and by that week, it had our names printed on it. The rescue. The dragon that had wandered off to somewhere it liked better. The strange, too capable clerk and his 3 fierce girls. All of it, spread out for anyone to stop and read. A man in a deep hood stood in front of that board for a long time. I did not see this. I am putting it together the same way I put together the forest, afterward, from pieces. Once it was already too late to matter. He read every line about me with his good hand curled tight at his side, and his other one, the ruined one, held against his chest. He was well dressed under the hood, gold at his wrists, the kind of man who was not used to losing at anything. And he had lost, to me, to my girls, in a back alley he had believed was safe, and he had decided the whole ruin of it belonged to one name. He said that name to the board like a debt he fully meant to collect, Adrian Harrington. Then he shoved off through the crowd, knocked a smaller man aside without so much as looking down at him, and went out into the city to do the thing men like him always do when they cannot stand to be beaten fairly. He started gathering the others, the bitter ones, the thrown away ones. The knights an order had ruined, the adventurers a frontier had left behind. Every man who had ever decided that his own failure was really somebody else's crime. There were far more of them out there than you would think. There always are. I was happy that week. I need you to know that. I had my girls, I had my pen, I had a merchant somewhere out in the country making my invented valley come true, and a dragon settling contentedly into a home I had written for it out of thin air. I did not know that a man in a hood had just set my name at the very top of a list. I would find out, but not for a while yet. The egg hit Malcolm square in the face and stuck there, yellow running down into his collar. He did not wipe it. He stood in the middle of the street with the whole town watching, and he let it drip. Somewhere behind him, a child laughed. Then the rest of them started. These were the same people who used to step off the road when the order rode past, the Black Funeral Knights. The kingdom's sharpest blade, the name mothers used to keep their children in line. A year ago, a man who threw an egg at one of them would have lost the hand that threw it. That morning, nobody was afraid. I wasn't there for it. I was 2 towns over that week, doing something small and pleasant, filling a basket, walking my girls to the market, not thinking about the order at all. I only learned the shape of this later, in pieces, the way you learn about a fire from the stain the smoke leaves on a wall. But I have turned it over enough times now that I can see it plainly. They mocked him. "Look, it's the Goblin Slayers," someone called, and the street took it up like a song. Goblins. A pack of goblins had routed the finest order in the realm, and the whole country had heard about it. Seamus got a hand under Malcolm's arm and pulled. "Don't stop," he said, low. "Whatever you do, keep walking." Not everyone laughed, and I want to be honest about that, because it would be easier if they hadn't. An older woman by the bread stall looked at the 2 of them, young men in dented armor, one of them wearing an egg, and something in her face folded toward pity instead. She had feared these men once. Now she only watched them go, and looked a little ashamed of the crowd she was standing in. Malcolm walked. He tasted the egg later and said it was rotten, and somehow that was the detail that lodged in him, that they had not even wasted a good egg on him. They went back up to the keep with the laughter following them the whole way. The old keep had a name once, the wolf's den, and it used to sound like a threat. Now, it just sounded like a place where tired men slept. Commander Garrett was waiting for them, and he had a plan. He always had a plan. I have to tell you about the last one first, because it explains the man. The plan before this one had very nearly finished them. Garrett had heard from a woman he paid for company and mistook for a source of intelligence that a band of cutthroats had gone soft with infighting and were ripe for the taking, honor there for the plucking, out in a place called Hollow Valley. So he had marched his exhausted men across the country to win back their name. There were no bandits in Hollow Valley. There was a dragon. Here is the part only I can see, and I want to say it carefully because it still turns my stomach a little. Hollow Valley had not always been a dragon's country. Not long before, sitting at my own desk, in my own ordinary hand, I had written a small note in the margin of a map and called that valley the home of a great beast, a lie I told on paper to steer one wandering monster away from a city full of people. The pen did what the pen does. The valley became exactly what I had written. I never went there. I had never in my life seen the place. And the men who had thrown me out of the order rode straight into a sentence I had written, and the dragon was waiting for them, exactly where my words had put it. That is the thing I keep circling, and the thing I have learned to be afraid of. The truth was sitting right there in the open, their strength gone, their maps quietly redrawn, disaster arriving from the one direction only I could have named, and not a single man in that hall could read it. They blamed the goblins. They blamed the times. Garrett blamed the men. Then he told them about the wheat. He had heard from the same kind of source, because Garrett never learned anything the hard way, that a town called Redmark was starving for grain, and that wheat was selling there for a small fortune. Buy cheap in Queen's Garden. Haul it to Redmark. Sell high. No monsters, no fighting, just cartage and coin. He needed the money badly. The coffers were empty, and the ledgers that once hid exactly how empty had burned in a fire nobody could explain. A fire that, as it happened, had taken his own quiet corruption down with it and left him free to invent new numbers. Seamus asked the obvious thing. If wheat were really worth that much, why had every merchant in the realm not already thought of it? Garrett did not like the question. He gave the order anyway. Every wagon they owned, loaded and rolling by nightfall, sick men and all. They reached Redmark with a dozen wagons of wheat and found the crisis already over. A young man met them in the square. The town had sent him out to deal with buyers, and he told them, plainly and without much sympathy, that the shortage was finished. Other merchants had heard the same rumor and come running days ago. The town had all the grain it could eat. Garrett did not believe it until he heard the price. Seamus was the one who asked for the number, because the commander had gone quiet in a way that frightened the men more than shouting would have. The young man wrote the figure down and held it up. It was lower than what they had paid for the wheat back in Queen's Garden. They had hauled a dozen wagons clear across the country to lose money on every single sack. Garrett threw the paper in the dirt. He called Redmark a backwater and its people peasants, refused the boys' polite offer of a bed and a hot meal, and announced they were leaving that instant. He had wasted enough of his life on this hole in the road, and because the wagons were empty now of anything worth guarding, he decided to take the fast way home, the short road, the one that cut through the hills instead of going the long way around them. Two boys from the town watched the wagons swing toward the hills. One of them, the kind one, opened his mouth to call out. The other clapped a hand over it. I have thought about those two boys more than they will ever know. The gentle one wanted to warn the knights that the short road was not empty, that the thing which had strangled the grain trade in the first place still lived up in those hills and was hungry. The practical one stopped him. Those men looked like they could handle themselves, he reasoned. Let them meet the monster. If they killed it, the town's problem solved itself and cost Redmark nothing. They'll be fine, the practical one said, not quite believing it, wanting to. Look at them. They've got swords. The kind one did not answer. He watched the wagons shrink into the hills, and he said he was sorry, quietly, to no one who could hear him. The monster the boys meant was not one monster. It was a pack. They came out of the tree line as the light was going. Wolf things bigger than horses, each one carrying more heads than a wolf has any business carrying. They had learned the taste of men and horses on that road, and they had been waiting for the next wagon to come rolling through. Here came a dozen. The horses screamed first, then the men. Garrett did what Garrett always did. He gave an order to save himself and dressed it up as strategy. Throw the cargo. go," he shouted, and the men heaved the wheat off the backs of the wagons, barrel after barrel, praying the beasts would stop to feed. Some of them did, not enough. The rest kept coming, low and fast along the road, and the wagons had never been built for a race. So Garrett gave his second order: lighten the wagon. That was the phrase he used, lighten the wagon, as if the men riding in the back of it were sacks of grain that had failed to sell. He had them thrown off, the young ones first. Malcolm went over the side into the dirt, and Seamus after him, and then more of them, tumbling and breaking against the road, while the commander's wagon pulled away lighter and faster toward home. I told you at the start that this is the man who threw me out of the order. I have had a long time to decide how I feel about what happened to him on that road, and the honest answer is that I do not feel very much at all. He built the thing that killed him with his own 2 hands, one small cowardice at a time, for years, and on that road, it simply came due. There was no lightning from the sky, no reckoning arranged by anyone. He was only ever going to end like this. It just took until now. The wagon did not outrun them. A lightened wagon is still a wagon, and the wolves were faster than any horse alive. Somewhere up ahead, in the last of the red light, Commander Garrett learned that the arithmetic of throwing men to the dogs has a bottom, and that he had finally reached it. He was shouting his own name and his own rank when the pack took the wagon, as if either had ever meant anything. He did not survive the road. None of the men still riding with him did. The ones he had thrown clear lived a little longer. They lay where they had fallen, the ones with broken legs unable to rise, and in the dark, the pack turned back along the road for them. I will spare you what that was like. The men who lived through it could never quite say it out loud afterward, and I will not say it for them. When the dust settled at last, most of the order that had cast me out was simply gone, scattered down that road in the black, lost. Every one of them, save a handful too stubborn or too lucky to die. Malcolm was one of the handful. He dragged himself up out of the ditch, still breathing, and all around him, everything he had ever sworn to be was ending. The survivors did not save themselves. That part matters. For everything that comes after, they were finished. A dozen or so broken men in the dark, surrounded, nothing left in any of them when the arrows came. A whole volley of them out of the trees, dropping the wolves where they stood. Then another. Whoever was loosing them knew exactly what they were doing, and there were a great many of them, and they had plainly been close enough to help for some while before they chose to. A man walked out of the tree line when the last wolf was down, well-dressed, gold at his wrists, a deep hood pulled low, and one hand held against his chest, a ruined hand, wrapped in cloth that he never once used for anything. I know that hand. You have met it already, at the edge of another story, an alley in Keswick, where a monster in the shape of a girl tore a kidnapping to pieces and sent its ringleader running with his hand crushed. The same man. He had read my name off a notice board in the city and decided to make a life's work out of hating me, and he had spent his nights since then out in these hills, gathering the kind of men a grudge can be built from. Broken men, discarded men, men with nothing left but the need for someone to blame. He looked at the wreckage of the order, and he was pleased. He told them, in the smooth voice of a man handing out a gift, that they had been given an honor, that they would be joining his work, his one great purpose, a plan to put an end to a clerk named Adrian Harrington. Nobody kneeling in that road knew who that was. Nobody but Malcolm. And here is where the wound in Malcolm turned into something else. He knelt in the ruin of everything he had meant to be, a knight who had become cargo to be thrown off a wagon, and he reached for the one thing that would let him keep standing, a name to hang it all on. Not Garrett, who had thrown him, not himself, who had let it happen. He landed on me, the clerk they had all agreed was useless, the man they had cast out and forgotten before the ink was dry. Somewhere down in that broken, hollow laughter, he decided that everything wrong in his life traced back to Adrian, and he took the hooded man's offer like a hand reaching down out of the dark. He was wrong, of course. He was also, in the one way that would ever matter to him, exactly right. It did all trace back to me, just never in any way he could have known or ever be told. I was asleep 2 towns away while he swore it. I had my girls under my roof and my pen on the desk, and a quiet life I had let myself believe was finally mine. I did not know that a dead commander had just paid off the first small piece of a very old debt. I did not know that a man in a hood had taken the wreck of my old order and turned it into an army, pointed at my door. I found all of that out later. By the time I did, it was already on its way. The Duke of Ashcroft walked into the Adventurers Guild to hire me, and the whole room tried to stop him. I was in the corner with a mug I had not touched, half asleep, when Trina came off her stool like the counter had caught fire, a duke in her guild. She knew his face before he said a word, and the color went out of hers. Henry Ashcroft was not what a duke is supposed to look like. Plain coat, tired eyes, a little stooped, a blonde maid at his shoulder, and a small girl half hiding behind his leg. He cleared his throat and asked very politely whether he might hire Adrian Harrington off their books. Trina said no before he finished the sentence. Then Fred came out of the back, and he said no too, and he had reasons. I was the guild's ace. I handled half their paperwork. I had been there through the fire and the year that followed it. Behind them, the whole staff took up the noise like a choir that only knew one word. The small girl bolted through all of it and threw herself at X, calling her big sister at the top of her lungs. X, who never softens for anyone, softened. She said the child's name, Olivia, and remembered it, and the girl burst into tears on the spot. Nell and Pippa piled in to tease her, and for a moment the argument about me was the least interesting thing in the room. Henry took the wall of noise the way a man takes weather. He sighed, said it was a shame, said he had only wanted someone to take all the administrative work of the territory off his hands. Every ledger, every tax roll, every record in the house that no one had touched in years. And he began to turn for the door. I was on my feet before I decided to be. Is that true? I said. It was not really a question. All of it? The whole territory's paperwork? He blinked at me and allowed that yes, more or less, that was the idea, and started to add that with all this opposition, he would not dream of taking their ace, and I will do it. My own voice came out louder than the choir. Please, let me do it. Trina's mouth opened and shut. Somewhere behind her, a receptionist muttered that losing one man would not change anything. But Trina had gone quiet in a different way. The quiet of a person realizing she had spent years standing between a man and the one thing he actually wanted, and calling it kindness. That was how I became the man who runs a dukedom, and I have never been happier in my life. People say that back to me like it is a joke. It is not one. Give me a mountain of unsorted records and a quiet room and a full inkwell, and I will forget to eat. Which is roughly why, 3 mornings into a particularly good stack, X laid the flat of her sword against my neck and told me to rest. I explained that I was nearly finished. She had heard nearly finished before. I hugged the pile to my chest so she could not take it, which I understood even then did not help my case. It took the Duke himself to break us up, leaning in the doorway with that tired smile of his. X sent off to train his knights. Me marched away to wash and sleep like a boy caught up past his bedtime. Through the wall, a moment later, I heard the knights start screaming. That was just X saying good morning. Henry stood at the window afterward and watched the courtyard, where his daughter was playing in the mud with my 2 girls, all 3 of them shrieking over some game only they understood. He said it still amazed him, the way this had happened. The people who saved his little girl now living under his roof, eating at his table like family. I did not tell him the half of what I was carrying. He did not ask. Ashcroft is one of the 4 great houses. So is the family I was born to, the name I threw in a ditch years ago and never picked back up. Henry never once guessed. To him, I was only Adrian, the clerk who could not stop working, and in that whole tired mansion, that was the finest thing anyone had called me in a very long time. The territory was broke. That was the first thing the books told me, and they told me plainly, because books do not lie unless a man has taught them how. Ashcroft was bleeding money from every seam, nights unpaid and deserting, roads left unguarded, a treasury thin enough to read a newspaper through. So I did the thing I love most in the world. I sat down with every ledger the Merchant Guild had ever filed with the house, and I read them the way you read a letter from someone you do not trust. Slowly, twice, watching the exact places where the numbers held their breath. They held their breath in a great many places. It was not clever fraud. That is the part nobody wants to believe. It was ordinary fraud, the sort any honest clerk would catch in an afternoon. Warehouses signing for goods no cart had ever carried. Tolls collected twice and paid in once. A dozen little rivers of coin, all running quietly uphill into the same few pockets. Someone had been skimming the whole territory for years, and in all that time, not one person had simply sat down and added up the columns. So I added up the columns. Then I wrote out where every missing mark had gone, and which warehouse still held the proof of it. And I handed the pages to the soldiers, and I asked them very nicely if they would go and look. I was not there when the number reached the house. I have had it told to me enough times to see it anyway. Bertram, the old butler, The last man in Ashcroft who still thought I was a stain on the family crest had cornered the Duke in the long corridor to say exactly that one more time. I was unsuitable. My girls were savages. My paperwork was busy work dressed up as worth, and no amount of it would ever earn a place in a noble house. He was somewhere in the middle of all that, I am told, when the soldier came running. The man was out of breath and white as paper, waving a report over his head, and Bertram snatched it clean out of his hands the way you grab at bad news you have been waiting for. Some fresh disaster at last to hang around my neck. He read it, then he stopped reading. The Duke asked what the report said. The soldier could not get the words into any sensible order, so in the end, he just said the number instead. 30 million marks. Bertram made him say it twice. 30 million marks, seized straight out of the Merchant Guild's own warehouses. The skim of years, clawed back in a single afternoon by a man doing his filing. And then the soldier, still shaking, told them what that number actually was. It was the whole of the territory's tax revenue, not a strong year of it, the entire thing. Everything Ashcroft could squeeze from every field and toll and market in a full year, and I had put it back on the table in an afternoon of quiet reading. Behind the soldier came more soldiers, and they set down the coin bags they had been hauling, and one of the bags rolled and split its seam, and gold went spilling across the marble in a long, bright river that no one moved to stop. It just kept coming, and the corridor filled with the sound of it, and the two men stood in the middle of that sound and did not speak. I heard about all of it that evening. Someone asked me if it had really been 30 million. I said it was closer to 31, if I was honest, but I had rounded down in the report to stay on the safe side, and then I asked whether anyone had remembered to feed the soldiers who carried it all the way up the hill. That is the true shape of how it landed on me. To me, it had simply been a very good week of reading. To the house, it was the morning a dead territory drew its first breath in years. Bertram, they tell me, did not say a single word. For a man who always had a word ready, that was the loudest thing he did all year. Bertram found his voice again about a week later, because that is what men like Bertram do. Money runs out, he said. One lucky haul does not feed a territory forever. What Ashcroft truly needed was an industry, something to make, something to sell year after year. And building one of those took a lifetime and 3 generations, which I very plainly did not have to spare. He was still enjoying being right when Marvin Coombs walked in. Marvin runs the largest trading house to set up shop in Keswick, a big man with an even bigger laugh, and he had been half listening from the hall. He had been chewing on the same thought as Bertram, he said, a new industry for the frontier, and he had already hired the one man who could simply hand it to him. Then he called for me. I came in with both arms full of fruit. I had spent the best few weeks of the whole year out past the wall, in the wild ground near the frontier, doing the work I loved most and told no one about, sitting in the dirt with my pen and writing down every plant I found. Not the names, I never knew the names, only what each one was and what it did and what it was good for, set down plain and complete the way you would log a supply route. I had handed Marvin the finished pages without thinking much of them at all. Marvin thought a great deal of them. He was flipping through, muttering, and then he reached the one I had labeled dragon tongue fruit, and he made a noise like a man who had just been handed a mountain. One plant on those pages, he told the whole room, was enough to build a trade on. The book entire was enough to build a town. He caught me by both shoulders and half crushed the breath out of me, laughing the whole time. Henry looked over at Bertram very mildly and remarked that it seemed the industry problem had solved itself too. Bertram sat down. He did not argue. I think somewhere in that long afternoon, he simply ran clean out of ways to explain me and gave up trying to find another. I did not understand what I had done. That was usually the way of it. I had only written down what was in front of me, and the writing, the way it always did, turned out to be worth far more than any honest man had a right to expect. I never let myself wonder too hard about why. I had learned by then that I did not want the answer. While the house I served was learning how to breathe again, the wreck of the order that threw me out was learning how to hate me. I have to tell this part the way I heard it, because I was nowhere near it. Asleep 2 towns over with ink drying on my hands is my best guess. Malcolm had lived through the road that killed his commander, and he had crawled out the far side of it with nothing left but a name to put the blame on, and the name he settled on was mine. It took him to a bad place. Some smugglers had gotten their hooks into what remained of his men, down in a windowless building around a crate of stolen goods. The knights would play the decoy, the smugglers told them, make a great deal of noise out in the open, while the real work, a fire, an ugly one, got done quietly in the dark. Malcolm hated every part of it. But a man with nothing takes the work that is offered, and he told Seamus they had no choice, and Seamus, who has never once in his life believed that, went along with him anyway. It fell apart the way these things always do. One of the knights got curious about the crate, pried it open, and something small and quick shot out of it squealing. And right on the heels of that squeal, the military police came through every door at once. Somebody had known. Somebody always knows. Malcolm shouted for Seamus to run, and the two of them ran, out into the night, with nothing to show for the whole rotten night, but one more reason to feel wronged. From there, it only ran one direction, and that direction was down. Out in the hills past Keswick, the Sawtooth Bandits still kept a hideout, a name that used to frighten whole countries, and by now frightened almost no one. Malcolm walked in with a single offer: help me kill a clerk named Adrian, and I will help you claw back whatever you have left. On the road up, Seamus asked him, quietly, whether he truly believed all of it was my fault. Malcolm said that he did. Seamus did not say anything back. The bandit leader was a red-haired girl with a sharp mouth, and she looked the ragged knights up and down and laughed at what she saw. The mighty order come to this. Malcolm gave it straight back to her, threat for threat, and somewhere in the middle of trading insults, the two of them decided they liked each other well enough to work together. He stepped forward to shake on it. That was the moment the roof came down. I want to be clear that I had no idea. I found all of this out much later, in pieces, the way I found out everything that happened while I was busy being happy. The blast tore the hideout wide open, and out of the smoke walked a blonde girl with a sword she had driven point first into the ground, announcing that the Sawtooth Bandits had finally run out of road. It was X. Of course it was X. She had been hunting bandits clear across the territory as a training drill, her idea of a light morning. And when her Holy Sword Knights balked at charging a cave full of outlaws, she offered them a simple choice between the outlaws and more of her training, and they went in weeping and swinging like men who would much rather die honestly. Malcolm dragged himself out of that ruin with even less than he had carried in, and he still had no idea that the girl who had just flattened him ate her breakfast every morning at my table. They limped up into the mountains to lick their wounds, and that was where the last scrap of Malcolm's dignity finally went. One of his own men rounded on him, said out loud the thing the rest of them were only thinking, that all of this ruin was Malcolm's doing and not mine, and threw an old, ugly thing in his face about a comrade Malcolm had once put down himself. I will not repeat the shape of that. Malcolm's hand went for his sword, and Seamus caught his arm before it got anywhere near the hilt. Then there were footsteps on the path, and the whole miserable band ducked behind the trees, and up the trail came three girls, out hunting for treasure. Mynell and Pippa, ears twitching, bickering happily, and Olivia marching in front of them, insisting the other two call her boss. Malcolm knew that blonde girl on sight, the Duke's daughter, a hostage, a lever, the first piece of luck he thought he had seen in weeks. The knights jumped out onto the path and announced themselves, of all things, as kidnappers. Olivia went white and told my girls to run while she held the men off. My girls did not run. Nell drew the little sword she is far too proud of and went in first, because she is always first. And Pippa braced up behind her with a handful of light, and the two of them put Malcolm's grown armored knights flat on the ground in about the time it takes to tell it. Olivia stood there blinking through the whole thing, boss of nothing, saved once again by the pair of henchmen she only pretends to command. They dragged themselves home on one another's shoulders. Malcolm said it one more time, to no one, to the trees themselves, that all of it, every bruise and every ruin, was Adrian's fault. And behind him, quiet enough that Malcolm never heard, Seamus finally said the thing he had been swallowing for weeks. That can't be true. He was right, and he was wrong, and it would be a long while before either of them understood how. It was not my fault the way Malcolm meant it. It was my fault in a way not one of them could see, a way I still would not let myself look at straight. But that reckoning was a long road off yet. That evening, I knew none of it. I fed my girls. I dodged X's next lecture around the study. I filled a fresh inkwell, and I sat down happy in the middle of a whole territory I had hauled back from the dead. While up in the cold hills, a broken man learned my name by heart and swore to anyone left who would listen that he would see me in the ground. I found that out later. By the time I did, it was already coming down the mountain toward my door. The party had a ribbon strung down the middle of it, and I did not like that ribbon. It ran the whole length of the garden on little posts, a long bright thing whose only job was to keep two kinds of people apart, nobles on one side, commoners on the other. I had helped arrange almost everything about that afternoon, and the ribbon was the one piece I had argued against and lost. We had gotten here by a strange road. Weeks back, Duke Henry had called me into his private office, the first time since my hiring, and asked me to plan his daughter's birthday. Then he had leaned close, checked the door, and whispered the real request into my ear. He wanted the party to be a marriage hunt. He wanted me to line up suitors for Olivia without her knowing. I did not line up suitors for Olivia. I am not built for that kind of work. Olivia found out anyway, because I am also not built for keeping secrets, and I let it slip while she was hiding under my desk during a game of hide and seek. She was not angry at me. She was annoyed at her father for turning her birthday into a market. What she wanted, she told me, was a party the whole town could enjoy. So that was the party we threw. She and my daughters papered all of Keswick with invitations, and now half the frontier stood in the Duke's garden eating the Duke's food. There was one other thing she told me under that desk. She mentioned, the way you mentioned the weather, that her broken engagement had been to a boy named Adrian O'Brien. I fell off my chair. She thought I was strange for it. I told her it was a common name, and it is, and I left it there because the name I was born with is the one I threw in a ditch years ago, and I did not want to pick it back up in front of a child at her party. Then Olivia, glowing in her party dress, decided to make a speech about the ribbon. She walked a nervous young commoner through the food table, told him to stop bowing and start eating, and when he asked what the ribbon was for, she said it loud and bright. I was told a partition like this was necessary, she said, but honestly, I do not see why. Don't you all think so? The commoners near her went pale. One of them whispered that of course it was necessary, my lady. They could never. Across the ribbon, the nobles heard every word, and they looked at the crowd of commoners the way you look at something tracked in on a boot. By the doors, Bertram the old butler stood like the ribbon was the only thing holding his dignity together, muttering that this was no way to run a noble house. Henry, passing with a cup in his hand, told him to let her have her day. Then I found X at my elbow. I told her, very quietly, that there were a great many important guests today, and that whatever she was thinking, the answer was no. She promised to behave. She says that every time. The noble half of the garden was where the real trouble lived. I drifted close enough to hear them, which was a mistake. They were watching the commoners eat and narrating it to each other like a nature study. The greed, the noise, the plain lack of breeding. Then they got to me. It was Adrian Harrington, they agreed, who had talked the Duke into these open invitations, and it was Adrian Harrington who had ruined them all. My roads and my markets had pulled trade to Keswick, and their own towns had gone quiet, and somehow that was a crime I had committed on purpose. From there, it was a short walk to the man they actually wanted. Galen, Duke Henry's cousin, a lord from a branch of the family, and to hear that table tell it, the Duke this dukedom should have had. He understood how nobles were meant to help one another, they said. He would never let a jumped-up clerk hand a territory to the commoners. Galen sat in the middle of them, wearing the small, pleased smile of a man being told he ought to be king. One arm was bound up in a sling. Nobody said why. That was the moment my daughters climbed onto the table. Nell got up first, Pippa right behind her, both of them ears up and utterly unbothered by the crowd of glittering adults. Nell looked around at all the complaining and offered the obvious solution. If you're all so jealous, she said, why don't you just ask our dad to fix it? The table froze. One of the lords started to call for someone to remove the children, and then X was simply there, lifting both girls down with one arm each, asking in her mildest voice whether her people had caused anyone any trouble. The lord decided they had not. A younger noble was staring at Nell. He asked, careful, whether her father might happen to be that Adrian. Pippa answered for the whole family, proud as anything, that yes, their dad was Adrian Harrington, and he could fix any territory you liked. I should have stayed behind the hedge. I did not. The word work does something to me. I came around the corner before I had decided to, already saying yes. There's work? I said. I'll do it. Please, let me do it. Galen objected. He pointed out, sharp, that I was a hired man, that I could not go managing other lords' land without my master's leave. It was a good point. It lasted about as long as it took Duke Henry to wander over, cup still in hand, and ruin it. Let him, Henry said, easy as weather. It's hardly fair that only my house gets the use of him. And that was that. The same nobles who had spent the afternoon calling me a disease suddenly wanted a piece of me, all of them talking at once, and my girls stood in the middle of it beaming because their father was popular. Galen got up without a word and left the table with a good deal fewer followers than he had sat down with. Galen was not done though. He caught Olivia near the doors on his way out. I only saw the tail of it begin. She had gone over to be polite, the way a host does, and made the mistake of touching his bad arm, and he rounded on her. From there, it went bad fast. He brought up the marriage, their marriage, he called it, as if it were already settled, and Olivia, bright as a bell, pretended she had no idea what he meant. That was the wrong game to play with a man like that. He grabbed her by the arm, not gently. He told her, loud enough for half the garden to hear, that if she married him, she would have the territory and the title and everything that came with them, and that she should be grateful. She said it hurt. She said, "Please, someone help." Nobody moved. His family was the kind of powerful that made a whole garden of guests suddenly very interested in their own shoes. Then, two small voices cut across all of it, asking for cake. My daughters had found me again, and they hauled me by both hands straight into the middle of the worst moment of the evening, wanting to know if they could try the big one. And Olivia, clever, desperate Olivia, looked at me being dragged across the floor and made a decision. She pointed at me. "This man is my fiancé," she announced, "Adrian O'Brien." I made a sound I am not proud of. The nobles laughed. Of course, this was not the famous Adrian O'Brien, one of them said. The O'Brien heir had gone off to the Black Funeral Nights as a boy, a fierce thing, a real blade. And this rumpled clerk with the airheaded face was plainly nothing of the sort. They were very sure. They were, as it happened, wrong about the face and right about the man. And I stood there and let them be both. Nell tried to help. She started to announce, proudly, that her dad was really Adrian O'Brien, and I got my hand over her mouth and laughed like the whole thing was a wonderful joke. Galen did not laugh. He decided Olivia was lying to slip away from him, and he lunged to take her arm again. He did not reach her. A blonde girl stood between them who had not been there a breath before, telling him in a calm and pleasant voice that she would not allow him to lay a hand on her master. Then she hooked his foot, gave him the smallest push, and sat him down face first in the middle of Olivia's enormous birthday cake. The garden howled. Galen came up white with cream, shaking, and fled through his own thinning crowd of followers. On his way past me, he said a name, low, like a curse he was saving for later. Not O'Brien, Harrington. He promised Adrian Harrington he would remember this. I barely heard him. I was looking at Olivia and thinking about a name under a desk and wondering, just for a second before I put it away again, whether I had ever, in some other life, been the boy she was supposed to marry. The party was the start of it. What came after was better and stranger, and I still do not entirely understand it. Not every lord came around at the party. Some of them left still certain I was a fraud, a clerk with a good line of patter, nothing more. A territory did not fix itself because a man was tidy with a ledger. They had decided this, and they wanted proof, so they did a very undignified thing for grown noblemen. They went and spied on me. I had been lent out to Thornwick by then, Count Aldrich's town, a place so choked with monsters and bandits that no one had wanted it in years. The doubtful lords crept up to the Count's gate to watch me fail. Count Aldrich caught them at it. He is a young man with a cruel sense of humor, and he told me later he did not shoo them off. He let them watch. He even told them, cheerful, that every rumor they had ever heard about me was true, and then he stood back to enjoy their faces. What they saw was this. They saw X come back through the gate from a job, rimed white with frost, a dark smear of something frozen along one sleeve, apologizing to the Count in her soft voice for having lost control of herself a little. Behind her, out past the wall, something enormous moved and the whole air went cold. A frost giant, the sort of thing that empties a town, walking off the way a problem walks off when it has been dealt with. The lords did not have words for that. Then they saw my daughters. Nell and Pippa came trotting across the yard, playing some game only they understood, and slung between them, trussed up like a rolled carpet. They were carrying a full-grown bandit who had given somebody trouble that morning. My girls were not even winded. They were arguing about whose turn it was to hold the heavy end. And the great lords of the frontier stood at that gate and understood all at once that the clerk and the clerk's little girls and the pretty blonde maid had been doing this, casually, daily, as a kind of chore. The whole time they had been laughing at me. They did not laugh after that. They crawled. They came to me with their hats in their hands, the same men who had called me a disease and a con artist a week before, and they apologized, and they asked, some of them nearly begged, whether I might see to their territories too. I said yes to all of them because it was work and I like work. I did not gloat. I honestly did not think there was anything to gloat about. I had filled out some paperwork. I had read what was in front of me and written down what needed doing. To me, it was a good week at a desk. The part that still makes me shake my head is what they did with Duke Henry, the weakest of the four great houses, the remote one. The joke of a duke they had all quietly written off. They started calling him their leader again, their true leader, because he had been the one with the sense to keep me. Henry took it with a tired little smile, like a man who had misplaced his authority years ago and just found it down the back of a couch. I want to be honest about the size of this, because it was not small. A whole class of people who had thrown me away were lining up to take me back. But the ones who threw me away hardest, the ones who took my name and my family and left me a stranger with a borrowed surname, they were not at that gate. They did not know. That door was still shut, and it stayed shut, and no one in Thornwick had the first idea it existed. Galen watched all of it from the wrong side of it. He had a warehouse in the next town, built taller than a warehouse needs to be, because he was the kind of man who liked to be able to see. From up there, he watched lord after lord defect to his cousin's banner, and it curdled something in him. What was left of his faction sat with him and agreed that men who did not know how a noble ought to behave would get what was coming to them, that heaven itself would see to the traitors. They said it the way frightened people say things, to keep warm. But Galen was not only frightened, he told his few remaining friends not to worry. Confidentially, he said, he had found a friend of his own, a certain person, highly placed, who was also unhappy about how the frontier had been rising and who had offered him support. He did not say the name. He looked out that high window, past the dark fields, toward the lights of Keswick, and he said that other hands had already been set moving. I did not know any of that yet. That night, I was in the Ashcroft house with ink on my fingers and my daughters asleep down the hall and a stack of new territories to sort. The happiest and most useful I had ever been in my whole life. A class of people who had discarded me had turned around and come crawling back, and I took it for a run of good luck and a great deal of extra reading. I found out about the tall warehouse and the man standing behind Galen much later. By then, it had already stopped being a scheme and started being an army. There was a girl starving in the back streets of my town that autumn, and I never once saw her face. I put the rest of it together long after, from people who were there, and I am telling it the way they told me, because it is where the whole thing started. That night, she was being hunted. Rough men with torches, not soldiers, fanning through the alleys after her the way you drive game. She had spent the whole day scraping together a little food, and she was carrying it wrapped against her chest, and when she ran, a round fruit slipped loose and rolled out into the open street. One of them saw it roll. He shouted. The torches all turned at once. She swore under her breath, one thin curse, and bolted deeper into the dark. And somewhere in there, she stopped even asking why. She just ran and wondered, the way you wonder about weather, how much longer she was going to have to live like this. The woman who found her was named Reggie. I knew her only as a face at the Adventurers Guild, a black-haired receptionist who never smiled at me, and I never once wondered why. She had reasons. The whole town had gone soft on the name Adrian, and she had not, and in a town like that, the people who do not join the worship get made to pay for it. Extra shifts, small cruelties. Once, somebody had left a dead animal against her gate as a message. So when she came home in the rain and saw a filthy shape slumped by that same gate, she thought it was another dead thing left to spite her. She laughed at it, bitter and tired, and walked over to drag it off before it stank up her morning. It moved. It was breathing. It was a girl. She almost left her there. She told herself it was nothing to do with her, took 3 steps toward her own door, and then turned around swearing and hauled the girl inside. If you're going to collapse, she muttered, carrying her, do it on somebody else's step. Die on mine and it'll ruin my sleep. She said her own steps felt lighter going in than they had going out. She did not think about why. She woke the girl with the smell of barley porridge. There was an egg stirred through it, easy on an empty stomach, and a cup of water already poured because Reggie had guessed she would choke, and she did. The girl ate like something cornered, one arm curled around the bowl. When she finally tried to say thank you, her stomach growled straight over the words, loud in the little kitchen, and her whole face went red. Reggie laughed for the first time in a long while and pushed her own bowl across the table. Then she brushed the tangled hair back off the girl's face and stopped. The girl's eyes did not match. One was a blue-green like deep water, and the other was a dark red like a coal. And Reggie had only ever heard of eyes like that in a fairy story, set in a jewel that changed color in the light. The girl's name was Alec, and for a little while, the two of them were almost happy. Cleaned up and fed for a week, she turned out to have ash-gray hair and a sharp, guarded way of talking, and she called herself by a boy's rough word for I, and Reggie never asked about it. Alec learned fast. She taught herself to read the common script off Reggie's old ledgers, and the evening she read a whole page out loud, she was so proud she could barely sit still. Reggie promised her a treat for it, a sweet fruit she had been saving for. I have thought about that week more than I should. It was the one clean thing in all of this, and it did not last, because a wanted poster had gone up at the guild, and the face on it was Alec's, and Reggie saw it before Alec did and said nothing. She hid it in her bag and carried it home, meaning to burn it. Alec found it first, digging for the promised fruit. She went very still. Then something behind her eyes just closed. She looked up at the only adult who had ever fed her and decided in one breath that Reggie was the same as all the rest of them, that this had always been a trap. "So you're the same," she said. "I trusted you." Reggie reached for her, saying wait, saying she had been going to explain, but the door was already banging on its hinges and the girl was gone into the streets. Reggie chased her until her lungs gave out. She lost her at the exact corner where she had first found her, and she sat down there in the dirt and could not get up. Alec ran until there was nowhere left to run and folded up in the dark against a cold wall. "Alone again," she whispered to no one. Just like before, that was when the creature came to her. A small thing, low to the ground, ferret-shaped, with fur so vividly blue it seemed to hold its own light. It came right up and pressed against her foot and made a soft, questioning sound. She should have been afraid of it. She was too empty to be afraid of anything. She still had the sweet fruit in her fist, the treat she had been promised and would never eat. She held it out, and the little creature took it and ate it in quick, delighted bites. And something about the way it ate reminded her of someone, and she almost laughed and almost cried instead. When the last of it was gone, it climbed into her lap and licked the tears off her cheek. "Want to come with me?" she asked it. It chirped like that was the easiest question in the world. She named it Sandora. The two of them slipped out of the alley together and out of the town, and out of anyone's help, and I did not know a single piece of that yet. I would learn her name much later, at a much worse time, and by then it would be far too late to do her any good. Reggie went back to the guild hollow. She asked whether the girl on the poster had been caught, and a coworker told her no, and told her something else besides. The poster had already been pulled down. Someone highly placed had waved it away as a child's foolishness not worth chasing, and the name that had done it was Adrian Harrington. She should have heard mercy in that. I would like to think I meant it as mercy. What she heard was the man the whole town praised reaching down one more time to decide the shape of her life without ever knowing her name. It was me who had taken the girl's danger away, and it was me she blamed for the girl being gone. Grief does its arithmetic however it wants. She came home and found her own door unlocked, though she was certain she had locked it, and for one wild instant, she let herself hope Alec had come back. She called the girl's name into the dark. The man waiting inside her house was not Alec. He wore a hood, and he sat like he had every right to the chair, and he knew her full name before she spoke it. He asked her, quiet and reasonable, whether she wanted to make Adrian Harrington pay for what her life had become. She did not throw him out. She did not scream for help. She just stood there in her own doorway, and she did not say no. And that silence was the first move in a game I had no idea was already on the board. I found out about all of that later. Here is the part I lived. The same stretch of days, I was standing in a crowded parlor, listening to lords tell each other how wonderful I was. It had become a kind of hobby for them. They passed my supposed deeds around the room like sweets, each one bigger than the last, until a bandit crew I had merely helped process on paper had become a horde I personally reformed with a single letter. Duke Henry tried to gentle them, warning that every faction has its reasons, and it is dangerous when everyone rushes the same way at once. They flattered him and ignored him. Then the whole room jumped, because something outside went off with a boom that rattled the glass. A lord got to the window first and reported the city wall coming down in a slide of smoke and stone. Everyone relaxed almost at once. That was just X, they agreed, fondly, the way you forgive a storm. She had a habit of it. One of them, laughing, said the only real danger now would be if desperate Galen picked this exact moment to march on a town with a hole in its wall. Nobody laughed back. Into that silence, the doors slammed open, and Bertram came through them white as paper. "My lord," he got out, "Count Galen has declared war. He calls himself the rightful duke, and he is marching his host onto Gerudo Plain this hour." The parlor came apart. Lords who had been trading jokes were suddenly at each other's throats, blaming the one who had said it out loud, and then all of them turned to me at once, the way a drowning man turns to the nearest floating thing. "Save us, Adrian. Do something, Adrian." I am not a soldier. I wanted very badly to say so and go home, but I was the only one in that room doing arithmetic instead of screaming, and the arithmetic was ugly. The wall was broken. If we sat behind it and let Galen come, every stone he threw would land in a street full of my neighbors. "We don't wait for him," I heard myself say. "We go out and meet him on the plain, away from the town. Now, while the wall still has anyone left to defend it." X was already at my elbow. Gold eyes lit up like a holiday. She said to leave the whole shabby lot of them to her, and told me the two of us were going together, and it was not really really a question. Nell and Pippa each grabbed a fistful of my coat, grinning. Marvin and Henry swore they would hold the town, blocked the door so I could not think better of it, and then X simply picked me up off the floor. I heard myself explaining, at some volume, that war was a frightening place, and I did not want to go. She said everyone says that the first time. Then she jumped off the terrace with all three of them and me, and my objections trailed out behind us across the whole of Keswick. Across the river, Galen was busy being certain he had already won. I heard afterward how he spent that morning. He had put on his ancestors' armor, all glitter and old gold, and he was showing off a letter to anyone who would look. It was written on wyvern skin, because to Galen, the value of a promise was in how expensive the paper was. The promise itself was simple. A powerful friend, unnamed, had vowed that once Galen drew our forces out and across the Ulri, that friend would fall on our rear and crush us between them. A perfect pincer, a sure thing. His allied lords cheered themselves hoarse over it, already dividing up land that was not theirs. Galen played the calm commander for them, cautioning that no battle is won before it begins, and they praised him for his wisdom. Then he sent them off to their soldiers, and the moment they were gone, he called them useless fools, gathered up for their numbers and nothing else. He walked out alone to look at his army filling the plain, more men than the grass could hold, and standing there, he thought the exact smug thought he had scolded his allies for saying out loud. With a force like this, it was as good as won. A dust cloud came toward Galen's host across the plain, and his lords howled that the enemy army had arrived, and the whole overconfident mass of them braced for a war. The dust settled, and there were four of us, me, X, and two little girls with animal ears. You could feel the confusion roll through their ranks like a cold wind. Galen went red to his ears. He started insisting we had to be a decoy, an advance scout, that the real army was surely right behind us. X answered him by planting her sword in the dirt and announcing cheerfully to the entire field that there were four of us. That was all, and they were welcome to come and fight. For a moment, his bluster almost held the line together. Then I, being me, shouted out loud that there really was nobody coming to back us up, which did not help. It did not matter. Galen ran out of patience and ordered a full charge, and then found himself running at us more or less alone. He tripped, he went down hard, and when he looked up from the grass, his ancestral sword was snapped clean at the tip, and X was already standing over him, not even breathing hard. She had gone through his whole army in the time it took him to fall. Not one of them was dead. She had been careful about that, because they were still the Duke's countrymen, and this was a family quarrel. So the entire host lay across the plain merely unconscious, sleeping off the worst afternoon of their lives. My daughters were skipping between the bodies with a basket, cheerfully checking pulses and selling healing drafts by the dose to anyone awake enough to buy. This was the moment Galen was supposed to fall, the loud fool who had mocked me at a party and then marched on my town, laid flat in the dirt in front of everyone. I let myself enjoy it for exactly one breath. Then Galen, flat on his back, laughed and said it did not matter, that his army had only ever been a diversion. And one of his own noble allies, a sneering man who had clearly known the truth the whole time, stepped forward to twist the knife. Galen, he told him, had never been the plan. Galen was the bait. The entire host on this plain existed for one reason, to pull X and me as far from Keswick as a body could get. And while we stood here winning, the real army, the one that mattered, was already marching on our undefended town. X knocked him cold before he finished gloating. It changed nothing. I looked back the way we had come, at all that empty grass between us and home, and I understood exactly how far we were, and exactly how fast X could run, and that even that would not be fast enough. The victory turned to ash in my mouth while I was still standing on it. Here is what was happening at home while I stood there being clever on the wrong side of a river. A real army had come out of the wasteland on the far side of Keswick, not a rabble like Galen's. Disciplined ranks, moving in step, twice the men we had left to answer them, and they had marched straight for the one place the wall no longer stood. That was no accident. Their agents had been the ones to bring the wall down in the first place, days before. With a blast we had all laughed off as X being careless. At the front of them sat a man in a hood. When a messenger galloped in shouting that Galen's whole army on the plain had been wiped out, his commanders panicked. and I am told the corner of his mouth twitched once before he mastered it. Then he turned the disaster inside out for them. Of course, Galen was annihilated, he told them. Smooth as oil. That was the entire point. It meant the bait had worked, and X was stranded far away, and the road to the town lay open. His men cheered. Inside the manor, my neighbors were doing the bravest thing I have ever heard of. Duke Henry, who I happened to know was shaking so hard he had to hide his hands behind his back, smashed a bottle on the floor to cut through the arguing and told his lords the truth. With the wall broken, a siege would only bury the townspeople under it, so they would not sit and wait. They would ride out and meet the enemy in the open and shield the people with their own bodies. He begged Bertram to guard his daughter with his life, and the old man wept and swore he would. And Olivia, who was terrified, wiped her face and said that then she would fight too. They rode out, and in the wasteland, the hooded man watched them come, exactly as he had planned, and let his commanders go to the slaughter with a challenge to impress him. Then he stood alone and looked past the whole battle at the town behind it, at something none of them could see, and he murmured that this was only the first move, that the other scheme was still to come. He was not fighting for a dukedom. He never had been, and riding somewhere in that army, hidden among his men, were old debts of mine I still had not paid. Coming home at last with swords in their hands, the wall was broken. The defenders were in the field. My family was inside, and I was a day away, on the wrong side of a river, just beginning to run. I was a full day away, on the wrong side of a river when the worst of it happened. So most of this I put together afterward from the people who were actually there. I am going to tell it the way they told me. Reggie walked a column of armed killers into an alley in my town that night, and every one of them believed she was on their side. Their leader was a knight called Malcolm, dull blonde, a cloak thrown over his armor. He and his men had slipped in through the broken wall, while the real fighting pulled every eye the other way. And Reggie, the guild clerk who blamed my name for everything that had ever gone wrong in her life, had offered to lead them to the manor by a passage only the guild knew. She took them down a path that narrowed and darkened with every step. Malcolm grew suspicious, asking more than once if this was truly the way. She told him to be quiet and do his job, the same way he had once told her to do hers. Just ahead, she promised, was the secret way into the Lord's house. Then the walls pinched shut into a dead end. "We're here," she said, and she ran. Malcolm's hand closed on her wrist before she had taken a full step. He demanded to know what she was playing at. Hadn't she wanted revenge on Adrian? Had even that been a lie? "Let go of me." She wrenched free and put her back to the wall. A shape unfolded out of the dark at the mouth of the alley. Orson, a mountain of an adventurer with an axe slung over one shoulder, told the blonde dandy to do as the lady asked and let her go. Reggie slipped behind him. Malcolm's voice climbed, ugly now, insisting her hatred of Adrian must have been a lie after all. She laughed at that, sharp and bitter. "Oh, I meant every word. I hate him. If I could make Adrian Harrington pay for the life I ended up with, I would do it smiling." Then, the humor dropped out of her like a stone down a well. "But the men who crawl into my city to burn it down? I hate them more than I could ever hate him." Orson threw his head back and bellowed to the shadows that they had all heard it, that this was their goddess speaking, and who among them could keep still after that? The alley answered him. Adventurers poured out of every doorway and cellar mouth, dozens of them, roaring. Reggie went red to the ears and muttered at Orson to stop teasing her. He was already charging. Out in the wasteland, meanwhile, it was going badly. Duke Henry had ridden out to meet the hooded man's army in the open, to keep the killing away from the townspeople, and the hooded man's army was twice his and far better drilled. His flanks were folding. A messenger begged for reinforcements he did not have. Then word came that the lord holding his right wing had simply thrown down his command and fled, and the whole line began to peel apart like wet paper. Henry had never trained as a general, and it showed. He told me later he spent that afternoon cursing himself for never taking his old lessons seriously. He turned his horse toward the collapsing wing to hold it himself, and an enemy rider broke clean through the front and came at him with a leveled spear. One of his own knights flung himself into the path and shouted for Henry to run. Then the strangest thing in the whole war happened. The knight who should have died on that spear caught it instead. He plucked it out of the air, stared at his own hand as if it belonged to a stranger, and hurled the spear back through the enemy ranks hard enough to cut a lane through them. All across the field it was happening. Henry's spent, exhausted knights were suddenly moving like something out of a bedtime story, thanking X's blessing for the strength welling up in their arms. Not one of them able to say where it had truly come from. I could have told them. Every one of those names was written down in my records, in my own hand. In the ledger I never let anyone read. What they felt swelling up in them was only the ink coming due. That is all the pen ever was. But I was not there to explain it, and they were far too busy winning to stop and ask. The routed wing steadied and turned. The lords who had been running for the horizon wheeled around to join the winning side, the way that kind of man always does. And in the middle of a battle he was suddenly impossibly winning, Henry started to laugh, a dry, helpless laugh, because none of it made any sense, and he had stopped needing it to. The reason all of it was happening arrived a moment later. A last wedge of enemy cavalry had swung wide to fall on Henry's undefended rear. Their commander saw a golden-haired girl standing alone in the empty grass between his horses and the Duke, and he leered and promised her as a prize to whichever of his men earned the most blood. He and his entire troop were on the ground before he finished the sentence. X had run the whole way from the river. Henry ran to her with his face a mess of tears and thanks. And then the enemy closed the gap she had opened and came on again, a fresh wall of soldiers pouring forward to fill the dead. X told Henry, gently, to keep his head down. Then she raised the sword and called out, without a trace of embarrassment, the name of the thing she was about to do. Holy sword slash. I have seen her do it and I still cannot describe it properly. A single clean line of light went out across the field, and the charge simply stopped. No screaming, no wreckage. One breath there was an army rushing them, and the next there was quiet, and a whole host lying in the grass, breathing, going nowhere. She is very careful about that. She always has been. Henry muttered, mostly to himself, that the attack had a truly terrible name. X turned and asked him what he had just said. He said nothing. Nothing at all, he assured her, and laughed like a man edging away from a cliff. Then X looked straight up into the sky and said she had been waiting for her master. That was when I fell out of it. I would love to tell you I arrived like a hero. I arrived screaming, arms and legs going every direction, a bundle of documents crushed to my chest, dropping toward a battlefield from higher than any sensible man should ever be. X caught me without so much as shifting her feet, the way you would catch a dropped spoon, set me gently upright, and welcomed me home. Am I alive? I looked around at the flattened army, at Henry's wet, ruined face. Henry, hello. The papers I had been clutching scattered across the grass. My records. The rough dragon leather ledger I had poured every last thing I had into. Empty now. Spent down to nothing. Henry gathered the pages up and pressed them back into my hands without the faintest idea of what he was holding. I remember opening my mouth to tell him the ledger still had a little life left in it, that there might yet be one more name I could write. I never got to finish the sentence. Back in the alley, the same impossible thing was busy saving the people I loved most. Orson stood alone between Malcolm's knights and Reggie, and he should have been cut to pieces. Malcolm, tired of him, slid a blade into his back and told him, almost kindly, that such stubbornness was admirable. Orson looked down at the steel and found no blood at all. It had scraped across his skin like a knife dragged over stone and gone no deeper. He was as astonished as anyone. Malcolm accused him of gulping some strengthening potion. Orson had no answer to give. And then Reggie, backed hard against the wall, screamed at a fleeing knight to stop, and the man stopped, mid-stride, boots nailed to the cobbles by nothing but her voice. She tried it again, barely believing it. Come here. He came, fighting his own legs the whole shuffling way. When she told him to knock himself out, he laid himself flat with the flat of his own sword. The beaten adventurer whose skin turned blades and the tired clerk whose words had become law looked at each other and quietly agreed not to ask any questions. But Malcolm had watched her work and understood she was the pin the whole group turned on. He drifted back out of the fighting, circled, and waited. Reggie leapt out from cover, certain she had to be close for her voice to land, and that was exactly the opening he had been holding for. His blade was already falling toward her when two shapes hit the alley at once. A girl with black cat ears and a girl with white dog ears, my daughters, Nell and Pippa, dropped out of nowhere, scooped Reggie clean out from under the sword, and set her down safe behind them. They wiped their brows and announced, cheerful as anything, that everything was fine now that they had arrived. They were fighting at a sliver of their real strength. I had spent everything they had on the town, on the knights and the clerk and strangers whose names I barely knew, and left nothing over for my own girls. They never once complained to me about it. Malcolm cut through the space where Reggie had been and found only air, and then someone dropped straight onto his head. A gray-haired girl in a tattered sheet had been perched on a laundry line above the whole fight. Alec. She kicked off his face on her way down, and her small blue-furred companion, Sandora, sprang after her to rake him once and leap clear. When Malcolm turned his blade toward Reggie one final time, Alec's mismatched eyes, one blue-green and one deep red, lit from within, and a beam of pure light tore his sword to slivers and carved a smoking groove down the length of the alley stones. She told him, flat and cold, that anyone who laid a hand on Reggie would answer to her. All over Keswick that night, the same story was telling itself. The town had spent years laughing at these people. The clerk nobody ever thanked, the loud, washed-up adventurer who talked too much, the strange gray-haired stray, and the beast-eared girls the fine families would not seat at their tables. And when the disciplined knights of a real army came in through the broken wall, expecting to stroll to the manor across a town of frightened shopkeepers, it was those very people who rose up out of the alleys and shattered them. The knights had come hunting the weak and the discarded. Street by street, they learned there were none to be found. Malcolm should have been finished, scratched, disarmed, his knights sprawled unconscious all around him, hemmed in on every side. Orson asked him plainly whether he still meant to fight, or whether he would surrender. Malcolm said, evenly, that he would surrender. Then he reached into his cloak. One of his own fallen men saw what came out of it, and began to shout in real terror. "It was the evil dragon's jewel," he cried, a thing Malcolm should never have been trusted to carry out of the vault at all. Even frightened as he was, the man swore it was useless here. The jewel did nothing on its own. It needed a true dragon close by to wake it, and there were no dragons in a back alley of a frontier town. Orson felt the hair rise on his arms anyway, and told his people, low and quick, to be ready to run. Then he looked around at the ordinary alley and the ordinary knight, and let his shoulders come down. No dragon. Nothing here to be afraid of. Malcolm smiled and told them there was a dragon standing right in front of them, a very fine one, and he crushed the jewel in his fist. For one breath, nothing happened. Then Sandora, the little blue creature curled at Alec's feet, began to shake. Malcolm laughed as he backed toward the mouth of the alley. That harmless animal, he told them, had never once been an animal. It was a jade dragon, one of the high and hidden kinds, and now it belonged body and soul to the jewel. He said simply that it was over, and he ran, and I want it on the record that no one stopped him, because no one there had the first idea of what was coming. Alec dropped to her knees and reached for her only friend. Reggie threw herself forward and caught Alec by the arm. Nell snatched Pippa off her feet and went straight up the wall like a cat up a curtain, and Sandora, twisting in a sick light that was not her own, began to swell. What came next, no one who lived through it likes to describe. The light where Sandora had been went white, and then it went everywhere. The dead-end alley simply stopped being an alley. The blast flung the whole group clear, battered and deafened and alive by the width of a hair, and I will be grateful the rest of my life that every single one of them was alive. When the dust came down, the thing standing in the wreckage was not small, and it was not blue, and it was not a little girl's friend anymore. It was enormous. It rose over the rooftops of my town on wings that swallowed the moon, threw back its head, and screamed at the sky as if it hated the whole world for making it. Where its shadow fell, lanterns went out, and people stopped moving in the streets, small and upturned and frozen, the way a field of mice goes still under a hawk. Alec knelt in the rubble beneath it and reached both hands up toward the monster, still calling the little name she had given her friend, and the monster did not know her at all. Across the town, in the manor the enemy had tried so hard to reach, the hooded man himself had cornered Duke Henry's daughter. He had Olivia trapped in a long corridor, and then he did not. A soft, round merchant named Marvin, who had promised me he would watch over her, stepped out of the shadows and buried the man under a fruit that split open into a glue strong enough to hold an ox. Olivia looked out the window at the monster rising over her city, and, somehow, did not fall apart. "We still have Adrian and the others," she said. And she said it the way you close a door, as if that settled the whole matter. She had no notion that at that exact moment, I was being carried straight toward the worst thing either of us had ever seen, screaming most of the way. And behind her, quietly, patiently, the hooded man had already begun working himself loose. Out on the field, we had only just finished winning. The soldiers were roaring. Henry, filthy and bloodied and grinning like a boy, threw both arms around me and heaped on me all the credit I did not want, and I handed it straight back to X. And for one honest minute, the worst of it was behind us, and every man out there knew it. Then the roar came across the miles. The dragon's scream rolled over the wasteland and broke against us, and every head on that field turned toward Keswick, and the celebration died in a single breath. I panicked. I am not proud of it. Henry grabbed my arm, and I grabbed his right back. X simply held out her hand and told me it was time to go and fight that thing. I tried very hard to look like a man who had not heard her and asked if perhaps she was joking. She was not joking. She took my hand whether I liked it or not, gathered herself low to the ground, and leapt. I went with her, off the earth and out over the darkening wasteland, straight toward the monster standing on my town, shouting a great many things a grown man ought never to shout in front of his employer. Behind us, Duke Henry did the bravest small thing of the whole long day. The nobles came crowding around him, drunk on the victory, begging to charge the dragon for the glory of it. He told them no. A monster like that was a hero's fight, he said, and theirs was the people. With a thing like that loose in the streets, the town would empty in blind terror, and someone had to guide the frightened and shield them and carry the children out. His voice left no room to argue. The proud men of the field ran off to do the humblest work there was. Then Duke Henry stood alone a moment, watching two specks fly toward a nightmare, and he opened his hands and found at last that they had stopped shaking. "Adrian," he murmured to no one, "this is the right thing to do, isn't it?" The town had held, the war was broken, and the thing that had once been a lonely girl's only friend in the world was waiting for the two of us over the rooftops, and it was, by a wide margin, the largest thing I had ever in my life flown toward on purpose. X had one hand fisted in the back of my coat and the other spread flat against the wind, and she carried me over the broken roofs of Keswick the way you carry a lantern into a dark room. Below us, the town was on fire in patches, and above it all, the thing that used to be a small blue creature stood on the rooftops with wings that swallowed the moon. Most of what happened to my girls down in that street, I only got afterward from Nell, who told it in one breath and cried the whole way through. Nell came up out of the rubble tail first, coughing black smoke, and the first thing she did was reach for her sister and find only broken stone. She dug. She called Pippa's name until her voice went, and then she dug faster, and when a small white-eared hand pushed up through the dust, she grabbed it with both of hers and pulled until Pippa came free. They held on to each other in the middle of a burning street and would not let go. My daughters have exactly one fear under everything else, the fear of being pulled apart, of one of them ending up somewhere the other one is not. That night, the fear came true, and they beat it with their own 4 hands. Then Nell's legs gave out. Pure relief, she told me later, ashamed of it. Pippa saw the dragon turn its head toward them and screamed at her to run, and Nell said the truest thing a scared kid ever said, that she could not move, that Pippa should go and leave her. Pippa did not even answer that. She got her arms under her sister and tried to carry her, both of them too slow, the dragon's throat already filling with light. That was when X threw me. I want it on record that I nearly died on the cobblestones a full second before the dragon ever got a vote. She let go of my coat, I hit the ground rolling, and by the time I looked up, she was already standing between my girls and the light, one arm out, palm open. The breath came. It broke on her hand and split, and the 2 halves of it went screaming off over the town and carved the clouds in half. Then it was just the 4 of us in the smoke, and my daughters were alive, and I could breathe again. Nell latched onto my leg. Pippa latched onto the other one. Over their heads, X knelt to me, calm as a woman asking about dinner, and said the dragon was a bit troublesome, and would I mind if she took care of it. Go, I told her, and she was gone, gold streaking back up into the sky. Pippa tugged my sleeve and asked in a very small voice whether the whole city was going to be all right, and Nell, wiping soot across her face, answered before I could. Of course it would, she said. Father would take care of it. I looked down at the 2 of them, filthy and certain, betting the whole world on me without a flicker of doubt, and I did not have the heart to tell them I had no idea how. So I did the one thing I actually knew how to do. I climbed the clock tower. Henry had rebuilt it for me after X knocked the old one flat, and standing on top of it, I could see the whole town trying to run in every direction at once, which is the fastest way for a lot of people to die in a small space. I could not fight the dragon, but I have never needed to fight a thing to move it. I took out the pen and a scrap of the coarse paper I had left, and over the whole of Keswick I wrote 2 words, no entry. I honestly half doubted it would take. It took. The town turned, all at once, into a place people simply did not want to be inside, the way you do not want to be in a room with a sign on the door. No panic in it, just a quiet total wrongness of staying, and feet finding the road out. Down in the streets, it was working better than I dared hope. There was an innkeeper, some stubborn woman clamped to her own gate, shouting about ancestors, refusing to abandon a building for anything as rude as a dragon. Her son begged, she wouldn't budge. Then 2 small voices came down the lane, calling everyone toward shelter. Walk briskly. Don't run, it's dangerous. And the old woman let go of her gate and followed my daughters out like a lamb. I did not ask how. Some things about those two I have decided not to look at directly. I watched the crowd thin and pour toward the edge of town, and I let myself feel, for one breath, that I had this. Then I saw where they were going. The river of people was bending, all of it, toward the hill outside the wall where the merchant company keeps its experimental farm. That was not the spot I had picked. I had sent no one there. Somebody else was standing out past the edge of my sight, quietly gathering my whole town into their hands, and I had absolutely no idea who. I filed it under things to panic about later. Later was getting crowded. I was halfway down the tower ladder when X's voice came up from below, gentle and apologetic, and told me she was going to lose. I nearly came off the ladder. I got a grip, got my feet under me, and dropped the last of the way down to find her waiting. Not a scratch on her. While far behind her, the dragon slammed into the ground hard enough to shake the square, and a distant crowd cheered like the fight was already won. "It looks like you're winning," I said. She shook her head. Every blow she landed, she told me, went into that thing and did nothing at all. She could throw it around all evening and never once actually hurt it. In this shape, her strength simply did not reach. My stomach dropped. If nothing got through, there was no winning, only a very long losing. I asked if there was any weapon in the world that could bite that thing. X said there was, and I was already turning toward the manor, already sure it had to be some heirloom blade locked in Henry's family vault, when she caught my sleeve and told me I was being slow. She was the weapon, not the girl standing in front of me. The sword under the girl. The holy sword Excalibur could open that dragon like a letter, she said, but only in her true shape, and the girl shape she wore to walk beside me could not. I stood there while that rearranged everything I thought I knew about the person who did my dishes. That was when Nell and Pippa came sprinting back across the square, job finished, both of them yelling for me to praise them right this second. I did. I told them they were the best evacuation wardens the town had ever seen, and Pippa hugged me around the middle, and Nell put her nose in the air and said obviously. And because I am, apparently, an idiot, I looked at my two capable daughters and asked which of them wanted to hold the magic sword and go kill the dragon. X said no. She did not say it warmly. She stepped in front of the girls, and she told me, flat as a shut door, that she would not be lifted by anyone in this world but me. Not Nell, not Pippa, not in an emergency, not to save the city, not for anything. "You're allowed to be that selfish right now?" I asked her. "I am the holy sword Excalibur," she said, and there was that small, terrible smile. "Choosing my own hand is the one thing I have always been allowed." Behind her, far off over the rooftops, the dragon dragged itself back up out of its own crater and roared, and reached out her hand to me. The girls did not want to leave. Nell dug her heels in and glared at X, and finally, grudgingly, said, only this time, like she was granting a favor to a rival, and let Pippa tow her off toward the shelter. Pippa turned once, walking backward, and called out for us to do our best, both of us. And then they were gone around a corner, and it was only me and X and the thing killing my town. "There's no time, Master," she took my hand. "Hurry." I asked her hurry and do what exactly, and she told me, and I laughed because it was insane. "The one who lifts the holy sword Excalibur has to be a hero," she said, "so I should simply write myself the title of hero with my own pen, right now." I told her that was impossible. A title like that needs the finest materials, and I had burned my best paper writing over an entire town. What I had left in my coat was rough scrap, the cheap stuff, barely fit for naming a fence post. You could not write hero on paper like that. She did not argue the point. She just pushed the pen into my hand and said, if I never tried it, I would never know, so try. I remember thinking about a thing I had almost said out on the field and never finished, that the ledger still had a little life left in it. One more name I could write. I had meant it for somebody worthy. I never once thought of pointing it at myself, the man his own blood had crossed out of the book years ago, the clerk who spent his whole life making very sure nobody ever looked at him twice. I put the pen to the cheap paper. On the line where a person's title goes, I wrote one word, my own name for myself, the one I had never dared claim, hero. It took. It should not have. The bad paper should have chewed the word to nothing, and instead the word held, steady and warm, like it had been waiting on that line the whole time for me to stop being afraid of it. X made a sound I had never heard her make. When I looked up, she was crying, this proud, impossible creature standing in the ash with tears running straight down. I knew it, she whispered. Then, louder, fierce, the whole of her behind it. I knew it was you. You are my hero. You were always going to be my hero. And now the whole world has to write it down where I already had it. I started to say something about how she really did not need to make it weird, and she folded my hand between both of hers and pressed it flat against the center of her, over the place a heart would be. Take me, she said. Take Excalibur into your hand. I felt my hand keep going where a hand should have stopped. Not into anything I could name, into warmth, into light. The girl coming apart around my fingers into something that did not need a body anymore. There was a flare bright enough to bleach the whole square white, and a weight settled into my grip, cold and perfect and complete. I was holding a sword, not the broken half blade I had seen before. The whole thing restored, the length of it drinking the last of the sunset and throwing it back doubled. The power of it came up my arm and into my chest, and for one clean breath, I felt like I could do anything at all. Then the dragon threw back its head across the rooftops and screamed, and this time, the scream was aimed. It had felt the sword wake up. It knew exactly what had just been born in the middle of its town, and it hated me for it with everything it had left. And every scrap of the confidence went straight out of me, because knowing you are holding the one blade that can end a monster is a very different thing from walking up to the monster to do it. I tightened my hand on the hilt. Somewhere under the steel, I swear, she squeezed back. Out on the hill, the part of the story I was not there for was going wrong in the worst possible way. The whole town had ended up on that farm. The crowd I had watched bend toward it, and they were on their knees in the dirt, praying to the flashes of gold in the sky like she was a god. The red-haired guild girl, Trina, moved along the lines telling everyone there was room. Stay calm, all of it. And near the back, she found her senior Reggie resting with a battered gray-haired girl asleep across her lap. Alec, the one who had knelt in the rubble a few hours before and watched her only friend in the world turned into the thing over the rooftops. The dragon roared down over the town, and Alec's eyes came open. She said the name before she was even awake. Dora? Soft. The way you say a name you have said 1,000 times in the dark. Reggie told her to lie still. She still needed rest, and Alec was already up. Weak legs, torn up. None of it mattered. Sandora was calling, she said. Sandora was calling her, and she went straight through the crowd toward the edge of the hill where the big adventurer Orson stood as the last body between the refugees and the drop. Orson caught her by the shoulders. He is not a gentleman, and he was gentle then. That thing was not the Sandora she knew anymore, he told her. It was gone. She had to come back. No, Alex said, and the tears came with it. No, because Sandora is still there. She's still in there. I know she is. She tore loose from him and ran to the very lip of the hill, and with the sunset lighting her mismatched eyes, one blue-green and one deep red, she threw her whole small ruined voice down the slope at the monster. Sandora! And the dragon answered. It turned its enormous head, and it roared back, and Alex started laughing through the crying, because see, she knew it. Her friend had heard her. Then the dragon opened its jaws, and the light began to build in its throat, and it was pointed at the hill, at the crowd, at the girl standing at the edge with her arms half open toward it, frozen, still smiling, watching the friend she would not stop loving get ready to kill her. Orson threw himself over her. Reggie threw herself over them both. It was a brave, useless thing. Two people, and their backs against the light that was going to erase the whole hilltop. The breath came, and a voice cut across the whole hill, quiet, almost bored. The voice of a man who has already decided how something ends. Step back. The light hit and it did not land. It split against something none of them could see and went screaming off to either side. And where the two halves tore across the wilderness, they carved long black lines into the earth and did not touch one single person on that hill. The stray edge of it caught the tall flag staked at the farm's rim, the one flying the Ashcroft crest, and set it alight. The wind pulled it loose, burning, and carried it up and out and around a pair of shoulders that had just appeared at the top of the slope. There I was. I did not plan the cloak. The flag simply came to me on the wind and I wore it. The crest of the house that took in a man his own family had thrown away, burning across my back. In my hand, the restored blade threw the dragon's own light back at it, and every kneeling, praying, terrified person on that hill turned and saw a man walk out of the smoke with a holy sword and a house's colors streaming behind him, and something in them broke open. Trina got there last and just stared and said my name like a question. Adrian? Nobody else knew my name. They found another one. The word went through the crowd low and then loud, hundreds of voices catching it up at once. Savior, savior. I did not feel like anybody's savior. I felt like a clerk who had, 10 minutes ago, been too scared to write his own name on a scrap of paper. But I stood at the top of that hill with my daughters somewhere safe behind me, and X whole and singing in my grip, and a grieving girl on her knees, still reaching down the slope toward the friend she could not save. And one truth had gone very simple and very quiet in my chest. The man who had unleashed this had run, unpaid, still owing me. That account was still open, and it would stay open a while yet. But not tonight. Tonight, there was only the thing over the town, and the sword that could finally reach it, and me. I lifted Excalibur. The whole hill went silent under it. The dragon's throat began to glow again. For one held breath, nothing in the world moved. The impossible thing was possible now, sitting balanced in my hand, one heartbeat from the swing, and I stepped off the hill toward the monster. I brought the sword down. That was the whole of my plan, if you could dignify it with the word. Lift the blade, step off the hill, and trust that the thing balanced in my hand knew this better than I ever could. It did. My arms moved before I decided to move them. X, riding the steel, quietly taking the work off my hands the way she'd promised she would, and a clean line of white opened across the dark between us and swallowed the dragon's breath before it ever left its throat. The monster screamed, not the roar it had been throwing down at the town all night, the one that rattled teeth 2 hills away. A short, startled, wounded sound. The sound of something that had eaten everything in its path, finally biting down on a stone. There, X said, her voice coming up through the grip and into my back teeth. That got its attention. Now try to look as if you meant to do that, master. I had not meant to do any part of it, and I told her so. The blade only laughed and pulled me forward off the slope, down toward the burning streets, and behind me, the whole crowded hill of refugees made a sound I had never heard a crowd make in my life. Not screaming, praying. The dragon swung its tail, a thing the length of a bridge, and my own feet left the ground as X carried us up and over it. We came down on the far side in what used to be a market row, boots skidding on broken tile. The banner nodded at my shoulders. The burning crest of House Ashcroft snapped in the heat behind me like it thought this was all a marvelous idea. Can I take this off? I said. I'm fairly certain it's on fire. It looks heroic. It is on fire, X. Heroes, she said, without a shred of concern, are on fire sometimes. Look ahead. I looked ahead. The dragon came at us the way a landslide comes at a house, all at once, with no interest in whether we were ready for it. Tentacles first, then the tail again. Then that black breath boiling up out of its chest. X met all of it, and she was in no hurry about it. She would wait until the last blink, tilt the blade a hand's width, and the attack that should have flattened a whole district went wide and carved open an empty hillside instead. You could be a little careful, I said, watching a roof I recognized fold in on itself. People cannot be replaced. Roofs can. Duke Henry will forgive us. I doubted very much that Duke Henry would forgive us for the clock tower, which, I looked, and yes, had come down again. They had only just finished rebuilding it. I had personally begged them to rebuild it. I opened my mouth to say something bitter about it, and X told me, gently, to concentrate, because the dragon had decided it was done being patient. Then it stopped being patient. X asked brightly if I was ready. I said no. She went to full power anyway. I have never once been able to describe what that is like, and I have finally stopped trying. My own scream came out of me stretched thin and dragged low. A voice pulled down a long hall because we were moving faster than a voice is built to travel. The plaza smeared sideways. The dragon, which had been the largest thing in the world half a breath ago, suddenly could not keep up with a clerk and his sword. We took the tail first. One pass, and the thing that had been knocking towers off their foundations was simply gone, and the dragon crashed off balance into the dry stone fountain. The horn came next, the crown of dark bone it fed its power through, swept away under a single stroke, and the emerald light beneath its hide guttered like a lamp in a draft. Then, the one soft place left, behind the great jaw, a single clean thrust, and the enormous head went sideways and down. There was no blood in the telling of it. X was precise the exact way I used to be precise with a ledger. No wasted motion, nothing spilled that did not strictly need to be spilled. She was, I understood somewhere in all that speed, being merciful in the only language she owned. She was making it fast, but a cornered thing does what cornered things do. The dragon dragged itself up on its ruined side and opened its chest. Deep inside, past the broken light, an emerald orb swelled and began to sing, a high, cold note that ran up the back of my neck, and the whole plaza went green and freezing at once. Even X went quiet in my hand. Master, she said, and for once, there was no play in it. It is going to pour everything it has left into one last breath. So we answer with everything, all at once. One strike, no second one. How? I said. Shout my name. I told her that could not possibly be the reason. She said it absolutely was the reason, that I was welcome to question her vanity at length later, and that later would only exist at all if I did this right now. The orb was a small green sun by then. I could feel it pulling the warmth out of my chest from across the plaza. So I raised the sword over my head, and I felt like the single largest fool ever to draw breath, and I shouted her name into the cold. Excalibur, she answered from from the blade. Overjoyed, a rush of warmth flooding up the steel. Yes, master. And every last scrap of her poured up through my arms at once. And then, from up the slope behind me, under the roar of the orb and the wind and the fire, a girl's voice reached me, small and torn, and far too late. Sandora. I did not know the word. I did not know it was a name. I did not know that the monster in front of me had ever belonged to anyone, or that a girl on that hill had crawled to the very lip of the ridge to scream a name I had never heard at a thing I was already in the middle of killing. I heard one broken word and no more, and I had no room left to wonder at it. The dragon breathed. A wide black river of light came for the town, for the hill, for every praying soul on it. And I brought Excalibur down through the middle of it. The white cut the black the way morning cuts a bad dream. Straight through, no argument, no contest. And it did not stop at the dragon. It ran on through the great outer wall of Keswick, as though the wall were a held breath, out across the black fields beyond, all the way to the great wall at the edge of the world. And a long, thin crack climbed that ancient stone and stayed there for anyone who lived to see it in the morning light. The dragon fell. The green light beneath its skin went out and did not come back. And on the hill above me, the girl was still saying the name, over and over, to something that could not answer her anymore. I climbed back up the hill because that was where my daughters were and because the voice had not stopped. The girl was on her knees at the very edge of the ridge. Gray hair stuck to her face, one eye a pale blue-green and the other a deep dark red, both of them fixed on the dead thing down in the plaza and refusing to leave it. Orson stood over her with his big hands held out, not touching her, just there, the way you stay near someone standing on a ledge. He looked up at me and gave one small shake of his head. Whatever this was, it was already past fixing. I got the rest of it in pieces, later, the way I get most things. From Nell, from Orson, from the girl's own broken telling once she could speak in words again. Her name was Alec. The dragon had a name too, and the name was Sandora. Before someone made it into a weapon and aimed it at a sleeping town, it had been hers. The only friend she had in the whole world, she said. And she said it the way you state a plain fact and announce the end of everything in the same breath. I had killed it. There had never been a version of that night where I did not. It would have eaten Keswick down to the foundation stones, my two girls somewhere in the rubble of it. And I would do the same thing again tomorrow, knowing every single thing I know now. Both of those were true at once, and neither one made the other any lighter to carry. She lifted her head and looked at me. The man in the burning cloak, the one the crowd behind me had started calling savior. There was no fear in the look, and there was no thanks in it either. Only a promise, quiet and total, that she was not going to forget my face for as long as she lived. I did not look away from it. She had earned the right to make it. I only hoped, standing there, that I might one day be worth more to her than the thing that took Sandora away. Then I went to find my girls. Nell had one arm locked around Pippa, and both of them were talking at once, telling me every single thing I had just done as though I had not been present for any of it, and I let them because it was so much better than the quiet. We picked our way down through what had been a street. That was how I came to pass him. I very nearly missed him. He was down in a gap in the rubble, half under a fallen roof beam, and if he had not moved, I would have walked by the way you walk by a shadow on a wall. But he moved, and when I turned and looked, I knew the face at once, even under the gray dust and the blood he had bitten into his own lip. Malcolm, the man who had stood in a bright hall a whole lifetime ago and announced to a room full of people that I was nothing, who had taken the badge off my chest and the name off my back and put me out a door to die, and then gone on wearing the power he had always assumed was his by simple right of birth. There he was now, pinned beneath a duke's broken wall, looking up at me with an expression I recognized only because I had once worn it myself. The face of a man watching the floor rise up to meet him. He did not understand it at first, and then he did. And the understanding was far worse than the wall on his chest. His whole life he had carried the ice lance the way another man carries a title, proof of what he was, born better, made better, owed the world and everyone in it. He raised his good hand now and called it, and it came, the way it always had, a spear of blue-white cold answering a sun of privilege, and he threw it at the back of the man he hated with the last of everything left in him. And it touched the sword resting in that man's hand, and it went out, not shattered, not blocked, dismissed, the way a candle is dismissed by the sunrise. In that half a second, Malcolm finally understood the one thing he had spent years refusing to know. The magic had never once been his. It had been a gift, granted quietly through a clerk he had never bothered to look at twice, and the very day he threw that clerk into the dirt, his own light had begun living on borrowed time. Every sword of every man who cast that clerk out should have gone dark that morning. His had simply taken a little longer to notice it was already cold. I felt none of it. That is the truth I want to be honest about. The ice lance came apart against Excalibur a single step from my spine, and I did not so much as feel the chill of it pass. X mentioned it to me afterward, mild as a note on the weather, the way you would mention that someone across the road had waved. I only turned around at all because Pippa tugged my sleeve to point at a bird, and there he was, staring at his own empty hand as though it had betrayed him, his mouth working around something I could not hear and did not need to. I understood it anyway. It was denial. I knew the exact shape of it from the inside. He was telling himself none of this was real, that he was asleep somewhere, that the world could not possibly have arranged itself so that the man he had thrown in the mud was standing over him in a hero's cloak and was not even angry about it. I was not angry. That surprised me more than anything else that whole long night. I had rehearsed being angry at this man for a very long time. Standing there in the gray light, I found the account had already been settled, and that it had not been settled by me. He lunged up and forward, one more desperate grab at a power that was already gone, and the ruined wall pinning him shifted when he did. I will not describe what the stone did to his arm. He chose the lunge, the rubble did the rest, and by the time the dust had finished settling, he was sealed down in the dark of it, in a place where no voice was going to reach him, and no one was ever going to come and dig. I looked at him a moment longer, the man who broke me. I did not finish it. There was nothing left in him to finish. Then Nell asked, in the smallest and most reasonable voice in the world, whether we could please go home now. And that struck me as the only sensible thing anyone had said all night. So we went. Morning came up gray, and then, stubbornly, gold. The people who had spent the night on the hill came down off it slowly. The way you test a floor you are not certain will hold your weight. And when the ground held them, they began the enormous, dull, holy work of a town deciding to go on living. Someone found bread. Someone started an argument about a wall. A child cried and was picked up and stopped crying. It was the least dramatic thing I had ever watched, and I could have stood there watching it happen all day. They called me savior when I passed. I never did get used to it. I would nod and keep walking and feel like a man wearing a coat 3 full sizes too large for him. Nell and Pippa had not let go of me since the rubble. Nell held my left hand as though she were guarding it from thieves. Pippa hung off my right arm and informed everyone we passed, whether or not they had asked, that her father had killed the dragon. And in my other hand, quiet now, warm the way a hand is warm, X rode along and said very little, which for her was a kind of singing. "You were magnificent, master," she said at last, low, only for me. "You were magnificent." I was mostly screaming. "Heroes," she said. "Scream sometimes." I let her have it. I had mostly stopped fighting her on the word by then, not because I had come to believe it, because of where I had started. A little over a year before that morning, a man in a bright hall had looked at me and decided I was worth nothing at all, and a whole family I had happened to be born into had nodded along with him, and between them, they had scratched my name out and put me through a door to save themselves the bother of me. I had walked out of that hall with nothing in my hands and gone as far as a road could carry me, all the way to a frontier town at the ragged edge of the map. And I had started keeping ledgers there because it was the one honest thing I knew how to do. And somehow, without ever once meaning to, without a single day of feeling like the hero everyone kept insisting I was, I had become the thing the whole place quietly stood on, the sword in my hand, the town below the hill, the 2 girls holding onto my arms and calling me father, a Duke's clock tower that would have to be rebuilt all over again, a fed and standing frontier, and a wall at the very edge of the world with my one mark carved into it, all of it resting easy on a clerk that nobody back home would have crossed a street to say good morning to. Not everything was paid. I knew that even then, standing in the light, far off, in a manner I had trained myself to stop picturing, a father was sleeping soundly under a name he believed he had buried for good, with no idea in the world that the sun he had thrown away was the whole reason his sky had gone on turning. That account was still open. It would keep a while longer. And closer than that, up on the broken top of the clock tower, they would have to raise a third time. A gray-haired girl sat with her knees drawn up to her chest, watching a sunrise she had not wanted to live to see, whispering the name of a friend I had killed, and learning, very carefully, to hate the man who did it. That was a debt too. A different kind of one, the kind I could never pay off by winning. But that morning, on the hill, with the light coming up gold and my 2 daughters bickering happily over which of them had believed in me first, I let every last bit of it wait. I was the discarded son who had quietly become the ground under everyone's feet, still not quite able to say the word hero out loud. And for the length of one gold morning, with my family whole and holding on, that was more than enough.